Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with Amazing Fanfiction. This is the series of What If Luffy Ate Logia Goro no My Devil Fruit and Set Sail with Shanks. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. There was once a great pirate who possessed everything this world had to offer. Fame, wealth, power, he had it all. His name was Gall D. Roger. His were all the treasures that existed. Such was his influence that his last words sparked the start of a new era. As he kneeled on the execution platform, Gold Roger grinned uncaringly as he looked at the gathered crowd. My treasure. If you want it, you can have it. I left it all in that place. Find it. Everything this world has to offer, one piece. That day the world entered the great era of piracy. A000. Monkey D. Luffy was a 7-year-old kid with jet black hair and dark gray eyes that looked black if you weren't looking closely. He was standing on the deck of a ship as he glared at the grown men in front of him, all of which were looking at him with amusement. That angered him since he felt that they were always mocking him, making fun of him and didn't take him seriously. He might be a kid, but he was strong enough to shatter wood with one punch. His grandpa had taught him how to train his body before he left to do whatever it was that he did about 1 year ago, and with nothing better to do, Luffy spent most of his time exercising. That meant that at the very least they shouldn't dismiss him and so carelessly. With a growl, Luffy picked up a knife that was laying around and walked until he was standing a few feet away from red-haired man that was wearing a straw hat and had 3 scars going across his left eye. Luffy glared up at him with determined eyes. I've had enough. I'll prove to you that I'm tough enough to become a pirate and head out with you, he declared, raising the knife above his head. Shanks, the red-haired man, eyed the knife wearily for a second before he laughed and grinned down at Luffy. Dehahaha, go for it. Let's see what you are going to do. Despite his words and the grin on his face, Shanks' eyes never left the knife that Luffy was holding. Oh, look, Luffy is going to do something funny again, said one of the crew members loud enough for everyone to hear, which resulted in all the other men laughing as they turned towards Luffy with expectant look on their faces. Luffy gritted his teeth at the sound of their laughter before his hold around the handle of the knife tightened and he twisted his wrist and brought it down towards his face. He closed his eyes in preparation for the pain, ignoring the abrupt stop of the laugh of the other pirates as he did so, only to not feel pain exploding from his face. Instead, he felt a calloused hand wrapping firmly around his wrist and he opened his eyes, flinching when he saw that the knife was just a few inches away from puncturing his eye, surely to damage it irreparably forever. You idiot, shouted Shanks as he quickly took the knife away from Luffy's hand and then punched him over the top of his head, sending him sprawling to the floor of the deck and making a huge bump appear where he hit him. You could have gouged your eye out, you know. What possessed you to that, Luffy? With tears gathering at the corner of his eyes, Luffy looked up at Shank from his position on the floor. I just wanted to show you that I have what it takes to become a pirate like you. I'm tired of being scooped up in this good-for-nothing island. Shank's expression softened, and with a sigh he picked Luffy up by the scruff of his neck and set him on his feet. You are still too young, Luffy. Maybe in a few years down the line. If you are strong enough, I'll take you with me if you still want to. Deal? He proposed, carefully hiding how impressed he was with the kid. Not even members of his own crew were willing to harm themselves in such a manner just to prove a point. Say what you want about this kid, but he's got guts all right. Luffy perked up at that and he nodded his head vigorously as he tightened his tiny fist and flexed his arms. Deal. I'll be sure to train extra hard from now on. And if you don't take me with you, then I'll set out on my own and become a bigger pirate than you, Shanks. Shanks could only laugh at this, the rest of his crew joining in. Luffy only glared at them in anger and indignation. Oi, shut up. Stop making fun of me. LO0LO. A few hours later, Luffy, Shanks and his crew were at Party's Bar, the only bar in Fuchsia Village. They were all just having a good time, with Shanks and his crew eating, drinking and teasing Luffy who, despite hating how they made fun of him, genuinely enjoyed their company. Other than Makino, the pretty dark green-haired girl that tended to the very bar whom he would occasionally help with her chores in exchange for food, he had no one else to spend time with. Luffy was currently grumbling and pouting petulantly as he sat on a stool. He had to deal with Makino scolding him for attempting to do something as reckless as stabbing himself. He promptly ignored Shanks once again making fun of him, this time about the fact that Luffy was not that good of a swimmer yet. When Shanks was finished, Luffy turned towards him with glare. So, what if can't swim yet? I'll just stay on the ship. Besides, I'm plenty strong. I've been training a lot. My punch is strong as a pistol fire. Dehahaha, laughed Shanks as he looked down at Luffy. Is that so? Are you willing to prove it? Of course I am, shouted Luffy, gathering the attention from everyone else, before jumping down from his stool and getting into a fighting stance as he nodded his head. I never say that I can do anything without being able to back it up. With another laugh, Shanks set his glass of booze on the counter and stood from his stool and crouched down so he was at a similar height with Luffy. He raised one hand and showed him his open palm. Go ahead then, Show me if your punch is strong as a bullet. I'll be the judge to that. Everyone looked on as Luffy got a serious expression on his face as he stared hard at Shanks' hand. After a short moment he cocked his fist back and shouted at the top of his lungs as he brought his arm forward. His fist in a direct collision passed Shanks' palm, a precision that Shanks noted to be oddly high for a kid his age. His eyes widened, however, when for a second he felt Luffy's arm being coated by Busoshoku haki just before it connected with his palm. Shanks expertly hid the wince of discomfort that threatened to show on his face. No matter Luffy's age and current strength, being hit by a punch powered by armament haki without being enhanced himself hurt. It also didn't matter that even without enhancing himself he was still quite tough. He is only 7 years old and he is already showing signs of being able to use the Busoshoku. He said he's been training, but what are the odds of him somehow performing the kind of training needed to unlock it? He exchanged a look with his crew, all of whom looked a bit more serious now, and they nodded to confirm that they also felt what Luffy obviously unknowingly did. With one look, he told them to leave it to him. They promptly went back to goofing around as if nothing had happened. Oh, that was quite the punch, Luffy. I actually felt that, he said with laugh, downplaying it easily and enjoying the annoyed expression on Luffy's face. Who taught you how to do that, by the way? He asked nonchalantly. Luffy jumped towards his stool before answering. Gramps taught me how to train my body before he left. He told me to do everything on the instructions books he left me and that I better be stronger by the time he comes back or he'll introduce me to his fist of love, whatever that is. Shanks almost made a double take. Is Garp really teaching Luffy how to use haki? No, that can't be. As crazy as that overpowered old man is, he wouldn't dare teach a 7-year-old Busoshoku. It being a thing of chance and proof of Luffy's innate talent makes more sense. He quickly schooled his expression and laughed. Then you better start training harder. I've heard about your Gramps. He's supposed to be very scary. That monkey D. Garp. Luffy nodded his head. Will do. And yes, Gramps is very scary. Everyone except for the mayor and Makino hides away whenever he is in town. It's pretty funny, actually, said Luffy with a laugh before perking up in happiness as Makino put a plate full of food in front of him along with a glass full of juice. Thank you. He beamed up at her brightly, which resulted in Makino giggling and ruffling his hair fondly. Shanks laughed again. Dehahaha. You are such a kid. It's hilarious. Luffy was too busy devouring the delicious food in front of him to pay attention to Shanks. So focused was he that he didn't even notice when the door of the bar was forcefully opened by a tall, dark-skinned and black-haired man with a scar on his forehead and a goatee who began to mock Shanks and his crew. Instead, after finishing his meal and still feeling hungry, Luffy opened the chest that Shanks had brought with him, knowing that it contained more food, and he perked up when he saw a big, yellow fruit that was vaguely pear-shaped with jagged blue lines going down its length. Luffy promptly shoved the entire thing into his mouth and grimaced when the incredibly sour flavor hit his taste bud. He bravely continued to chew since his hunger more pressing than the foul taste of the fruit and swallowed after a few seconds. He made a disgusted face. Yuck, that tasted worse than Gramps' soup, and that's saying something. At least I'm not hungry anymore. Luffy's thoughts were interrupted when he heard the sound of glass shattering, and he turned towards the source only for his eyes to widen when he saw Shanks covered in sake while a man sneered at him. Makino gasped, and she was looking on with wide, shocked eyes. Just who do you think I am, you dumb pirate? Asked the man mockingly. Don't make fun of me. One bottle isn't enough. Shank completely ignored the man, instead focusing on the floor. Oh man, why did you do that? The floor is all wet now. He ignored how the man pulled out his wanted poster and began to brag about his bounty, the amount of people he has killed and the things he had done in the past, picking up a piece of the bottle and turning towards Makino, an apologetic expression on his face. Sorry about the mess, Makino-chan. Do you have a mop? It's all right. I'll clean it up, she stammered nervously. The man, Haguma, clicked his tongue in annoyance and he pulled out his sword. Luffy saw this and his eyes widened when he saw that Shanks wasn't apparently paying attention, meaning that he was going to be killed by this bandit. So, not wanting for the person he looked up to the most to get hurt, he jumped forward to stand in front of Shanks as Haguma brought his sword down in a diagonal arc. Don't you dare hurt Shanks, Luffy, the red-haired pirate shouted, and his eyes widened in horror when he saw the sword approaching Luffy's shoulder. He knew that even with his skills he would have been unable to stop it before it was too late, since he had not expected for Luffy to jump in front of him like that. Not even Haguma, whose eyes had widened in surprise as well, had expected it, but he made no motion to stop his attack either, showing that he cared not about the fact that he was about to murder a child. So, everyone was understandably shocked speechless when they saw Haguma's sword go through Luffy. Yellow arcs of lightning appearing as the sword apparently cut him clearly in half, only for the two halves to join back together, pulled back by snapping tendrils of lightning. Luffy also noticed this and he screamed in shock at the sensation of being cut in half and it not hurting, only to feel how he was put back together. This resulted in him released a blast of lightning in Haguma's direction. Higuma's eyes only had time to almost bug out of his head before he screamed in pain as thousands of volts of electricity shocked him at almost point-blank range. Even Shanks was shocked a bit, but he was made of sterner stuff and he barely flinched. And that was because he was wet in the first place, as a few arcs of lightning reached him. "Oh, please don't tell me." He trailed off in shocked horror as he turned towards the chest that contained that devil fruit they had found in Burka when they were exploring the Sky Island as they were making their way to East Blue in order to take a break from the ridiculous and absurdly dangerous waters of the New World. The smell of burnt ozone filled the bar along with the smell of cooked meat as Higuma fell to the ground on a heap, his skin darkened many shades further and his entire body twitching as his eyes rolled to the back of his head. The other bandits could only look on in horror as their leader was beaten and most likely killed if how his body suddenly stopped twitching and laid eerily still on the floor. Shanks gave his crew a sharp look as he stood up, seemingly ignoring Makino's horrified gasp as she looked at Higuma's body. His crew nodded back at him and they quickly moved to incapacitate Higuma's minions before they tried to escape. Or worse, attempt to harm Luffy in revenge for him accidentally killing their leader, which Shanks knew that it would only end in them sharing Higuma's fate. There was no way in hell that small-time bandits like them had access to Kairoski, much less Busoshoku haki, which were the only ways to physically restrain or harm Luffy now that he ate a Logia-type devil fruit. Luffy stared at the burnt and very dead body of Higuma. His expression was blank but his entire body was trembling. He raised his hand and he looked at them, flinching when sparks flew from them. "What? I didn't mean. No, this." Shanks put a comforting hand on Luffy's shoulder, making sure to coat it with Busoshoku haki so as not to get hurt by Luffy's new power, and he smiled grimly at him. "Calm down, Luffy. It might have been an accident, but what is done is done. Even thought it was unintentional. You killed him in order to protect me. You want to be a pirate, right? Killing is a fundamental part of it. But remember, it only should be done in order to protect what's important to you, be it a person, something you cherish, or your dream. It gets easier the more times you do it, but it should never be enjoyed. Do you understand, Luffy?" He squeezed his shoulders, trying to convey the seriousness of his words. Luffy had a few tears in his eyes and he gulped when he realized that Shanks was being 100% serious for perhaps the first time since he met him and nodded his head. Shanks smiled at him and nodded, ruffling his head. "Now, I want you to be honest with me, Luffy. Did you eat the fruit that was on that chest?" It was obvious that he did, but he still needed Luffy to come clean about it. Luffy shuffled nervously from one foot to another, not noticing how Shanks' crewmates swiftly dealt with the other bandits and began to take them away and out of the bar. Yeah, I did. I was still hungry and I saw Lucky Roo putting that fruit on that chest and bringing it down." "Why do you ask? Does it have to do something with what I did to that guy?" he asked before pointing at Higuma's body but refusing to look at it. Shanks sighed in annoyance. "That fat ass will be on 24 cleaning duty for the next decade." Still, he trailed off as he looked down at Luffy, remembering what he had seen today, and an excited grin appeared on his face. The sight of it scared Luffy for some reason. If this kid's potential was huge before, I am pretty sure now it is nigh immeasurable since he ate the Goro no Mai. I can't let this opportunity go to waste. Shanks waved him off. "It does, but don't worry about it for now, Luffy. I'll tell you tomorrow. Meet me at the docks at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to teach you how to control your new powers so you don't accidentally kill someone you don't want to. And we don't want that, right?" Luffy paled and rapidly shook his head. Even that resulted in a few small arcs of lightning flying away randomly from his body. After seeing this, Luffy stood perfectly still. Shanks laughed and he again ruffled Luffy's hair. "Go home, Luffy. Make sure to have a good night's sleep. Tomorrow's gonna be tough, so it would be in your best interest to get as much rest as you can." Shanks laughed again when Luffy wordlessly nodded and bolted out, a few arcs of lightning leaving his body to strike against the street harmlessly as he did so. When Luffy was out of sight, Shanks sobered up and he turned towards Higuma's body. "Now, what to do with you?" A few seconds later he grinned. "0. Boy, Shanks," said red-haired pirate looked up and grinned when he saw Luffy running towards him and sparks were flying from his body as he approached him. He waved at him in greeting. "Hiya, Luffy. Did you sleep as much as you could as I told you to do? Remember, it's gonna be real tough for you from now on." Luffy stopped running once he reached him and grinned up at Shanks, who noticed that his smile wasn't as wide as usual. I think I did. I couldn't sleep at first because well, you know. But I eventually fell asleep when my body couldn't help it anymore. I don't feel tired, to be honest. I feel with more energy than usual now that I think about it." Shanks nodded in understanding. "That's good," he said and then pulled out a bag from behind him that was almost as tall as Luffy and twice as wide. The sound of metal clinking against metal was heard as Shanks threw the bag at Luffy, who caught it with a blink of his eyes. Luffy opened the bag curiously and his eyes widened when he saw that it was filled almost to the brink with Buri bills and coins. "Shanks, what is this?" Shanks laughed at Luffy's shock. "Gehahaha. That's your reward for killing Higuma. That guy's had an 8 million bounty on his head." since you offed him, albeit on accident, it's only fair that you get it. Luffy looked at the bag with a conflicted look on his face and he turned towards Shanks. It's really okay if I take it. Won't it make me a bad guy for receiving money after killing someone even if I wasn't meaning to do it? Shanks smiled softly, and he put a hand on Luffy's head. You want to be a pirate, Luffy, and as such, you will learn that there is rarely such a thing as a good guy and a bad guy. We are all people with ambitions and dreams willing to do almost whatever it takes to accomplish them. Make no mistake, evilness and cruelty does exist, and those are the things you have to despise and fight against. Always remember to judge others by their actions and never by their words or appearance. Luffy's eyes gleamed with understanding and he nodded his head. I get it, Shanks. I promise to never be cruel or evil and to always fight against it if I get the chance. In that same note, I promise to do whatever it takes to accomplish my dreams as long as it doesn't go against my first promise. Shanks nodded, pleased. That's what I like to hear. Now, let's take that money to Makino-chan so she can look after it for you until you get back. We are heading into the forest and I believe we are likely going to spend the whole day there. With a grin, Luffy, with his bag full of money, followed Shanks. A000. All right, Luffy, I want you to pay close attention to what I am about to tell you. It's very important you never forget this, okay? Shanks spoke seriously once they arrived at a clearing in the forest big enough for what he had planned. They stood right in the middle of it facing each other. When Luffy nodded his head attempting to mimic Shanks' seriousness, with some success much to the red-haired pirate's hidden amusement, he continued. Yesterday, what you ate wasn't an ordinary fruit, but rather a devil fruit. More specifically, one of the strongest Logia-type devil fruits, the Goro no Mai, which gives you the ability to create, control, and transform into electricity at will. With me so far, Luffy nodded. That means that the reason why Higuma couldn't harm me when I jumped in between his sword and you was because I turned into electricity, right? And then I created it when I, blasted him? Shanks nodded, glad that Luffy could at the very least use basic logical deduction going something that he had already seen. That was going to make things easier. That's correct. Before we get further into what you can do with your fruit, I will explain the different types of fruit there are and their characteristics, okay? When Luffy nodded, Shanks proceeded to do just that. There are 3 types of devil fruits, Paramecia, Zoan, and Logia. The first one, Paramecia, are the most common ones and give you some sort of ability that can range from being able of sectioning part of your body to allowing you to cause earthquakes. Luffy's eyes widened. Earthquakes? Are you for real? Shanks grinned. That's right. The one known as the strongest man in the world is the user of that fruit. Whoa, breathed Luffy. Shanks chuckled. Next we have Zoan-type devil fruit. They are less common than Paramecia and they give you the ability to transform into a beast or an animal, along with giving you certain traits of that animal, like increased hearing range for example. Shanks paused, and when he saw that Luffy both understood and committed the info to memory, he continued. And finally, we have the type to which your devil fruit belongs to, Logia. This type of fruits is the rarest and is considered generally stronger than the other 2 because, as I said earlier, they give you the ability to create, control, and transform into an element, a force of nature. Yours is especially strong since it's lightning, an element that burns hotter than the sun and moves faster than sound. Hotter than the sun, screamed Luffy in disbelief. Shanks shrugged. That's what scientists say, and since they know their stuff I'm willing to take it at face value. He laughed uncaringly, making Luffy's sweat drop at him. A few moments later, Shanks was serious again. That doesn't mean, however, that you are suddenly invincible just because you can transform into lightning. As it is one of the strongest forces of nature, it's also one of the most difficult to control. Not only that, but there are methods that can be used to hurt you. Luffy gave Shanks a skeptical look, such as, when you consume a devil fruit you lose all ability to swim in the ocean. You are weakened to the point of being unable to move if you come in direct contact with it. That means that anything with the same properties as seawater is a weakness to you. There is a type of stone called sea stone that can be used as cuffs or to forge weapons that can harm you, he said, more serious than before, making Luffy gulp before he nodded his head vigorously, showing that he understood. With some hesitance, Shanks continued. Another method would be through the use of Busashoku haki, which is a special technique that allows you to hit even Logia-type devil fruit users when they are transformed into their element. Luffy watched with interest as Shanks raised his hand, and his eyes widened when it was suddenly covered by a black substance that was shiny. His eyes gleamed in delight. That looks so cool. Do you think you can teach me that? Shanks laughed as he dismissed his armament haki. That confirms it. Yesterday was just pure dumb luck mixed with the results of Garp's likely ridiculous training methods and Luffy's own potential. His thoughts were not on his face, however, which instead was pulled into an amused expression. If you manage to get enough control over your lightning powers and you impress me enough, I'll see about teaching you about haki and its types. All right. He grinned down at Luffy. Something tells me that he will be able to also use Kenbenshoku and Heishoku too. This brat. Luffy matched his grin as he tightened his fist and locked eyes with Shanks. Bring it on. I'll show that I have what it takes to be recognized by you, Shanks. I'm not about to let you down, you hear me? And Shanks wholeheartedly believed him. 000. Almost a year passed with Luffy meeting with Shanks on that clearing every day, except for the relatively short periods of time when Shanks and his crew would set sail to the ocean for weeks on end. Genuinely desiring to be acknowledged by Shanks, Luffy threw himself into his training with all he's got, and he succeeded on his task of impressing the red-haired pirate. Not only did he manage to get enough control over his lightning powers that he was no longer afraid of accidentally electrocuting someone, but he also devised quite a few different attacks with those same powers. Because of that, Shanks taught him about the 3 types of haki, and they discovered that Luffy had the potential to use the 3 of them a few months ago. With that in mind, Shanks taught him methods of training that would help Luffy develop Kenbenshoku and Busashoku haki. Heishoku haki was all about state of mind, instinct, and willpower, and its development was different for everyone, so the only thing he showed Luffy was how to reach within him to bring it forth, but training it was up to Luffy. Now Luffy stood at the docks, an upset look on his face as he watched Shanks' crew loading their ship with provisions while Shanks himself shouted orders at them from a few feet away. Are you leaving for good this time? Shanks turned towards him, an amused grin on his face. Yeah, we have stayed long enough here. It's time we finally went back to the New World. Shanks had also taught Luffy about the Grand Line and the things he could find there, and instead of dissuading him, it only made Luffy more excited about sailing a sea filled with such wonders. And not only was it time to go back, but he had gotten intel that Monkey D. Garp was on his way here. Even though he was a Yonko and he was the hero of the Marines, they were not in bad terms personally. That didn't mean, however, that Garp wouldn't attempt to capture him, and Shanks was not going to let him do that easily. There was no need to rearrange East Blue's geography after all, so avoiding him was the best course of action. Shanks' grin turned teasing. Are you upset? Luffy shook his head rapidly, dismissing the tears that had been about to leak out of his eyes. PFFFD. Heck no. A few moments later Luffy sighed and turned away, a sad expression on his face. I won't force you to take me with you anymore, you know. I decided that I'm going to become a pirate by myself. Shanks snorted. As if you could force me to do anything. Duh ha ha ha. He laughed before he grinned. So, you decided to eventually head out yourself? Huh. I'll be honest, Luffy. You have tons of potential, but there is still a lot you need to do before you are ready to become a pirate. Right now, you are barely scratching the surface. Luffy scowled and turned towards him with determined eyes. I'll show you then. I'll become better and stronger pirate than even you. I'll even find myself a crew stronger than yours. And then I'll find the world's biggest treasure and become the Pirate King. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look at Luffy fondly. Even Shanks' face softened as he looked down at him. You want to be bigger than us? Ha. He trailed off before he smiled softly and reached for his straw hat. In that case then. He took off his hat and put it on Luffy's head. This hat is my gift to you. It's my favorite one, you know. He smiled as Luffy began to cry in earnest, gritting his teeth as he tried and failed to stop his tears. Shanks began to walk towards his ship, and he turned around to give Luffy a grin. When you become a great pirate, you'll return that hat to me. Unable to form words, Luffy just nodded his head in agreement. He then watched as Shanks and his men set sail towards the horizon, not moving until he couldn't see them anymore. Luffy finally walked away when it was only him, and there was a determined look on his face as he headed into the forest. He had a promise to keep, and the first step into fulfilling it was to become as strong as he could until he became old enough to become a pirate. 000. Rise and shine, brat. What's this I'm hearing about you mingling with good-for-nothing pirates? Huh. Luffy suddenly woke up with a scream of pain as he tenderly cupped the top of his head where he had been hit in an extremely painful manner. Gah, that hurt, he shouted and turned towards the source of the voice, only to see a tall and muscular old man with gray hair, blue eyes, and a beard that matched the color of his beard. He was wearing a tropical shirt and shorts, and he was leering at Luffy malevolently with a grin on his face. Luffy paled in horror. Grog Gramps, the one and only, brat, he replied, inspecting his grandson and nodding mentally to himself as he noted that Luffy has indeed been training hard in the past year and a half. Makino had also told him of what happened with Haguma and what happened with Luffy. He had quickly deduced that his grandson was now a Logia type. Even though he was angry at Shanks for being so irresponsible, the fact that Luffy's immense potential had skyrocketed could only be a good thing. He was going to be an exceptional Marine. It was then that Luffy realized that his grandfather had been able to hit him, and he pointed at him with wide eyes. Oi, do you know how to use Busashoku? Or do you have a sea stone mallet hidden somewhere? Huh. Garp's eyebrow twitched in annoyance. That good-for-nothing Akagami taught him about haki. I should hunt him down and break his neck. But I suppose it was sensible considering that Luffy is now a Logia and he needed to learn about his weaknesses, so I guess I can't be too angry. He thought before he grinned, showing his fist to Luffy. That's correct, brat. So, don't think that just because you are a lightning man now you are going to be able to escape the fist of love, you hear me? Luffy gulped and nodded his head rapidly. Pleased, Garp put his fist on his waist and he looked down at Luffy. So, what else did Akagami teach you? Luffy quickly deduced that Akagami was Shanks since he was the only one with red hair that he knew and promptly answered. He helped me control my lightning powers and develop a few attacks. He also taught me the basics of using a saber and a flintlock. Then he taught me how to train in Kenbenshoku and Busashoku haki since he told me I could use the tree forms of it. He told me that only I could figure out how to train Heishoku. Outwardly Garp just nodded. Inwardly, however, he was thinking furiously. So, he can use all forms of haki, eh? That's good, excellent even. I think I should teach him the Rokushiki too. It would make him learn how to use Kenbenshoku and Busashoku far more easily. Not only that, but if he becomes strong enough, he can help me clean up the Marines from the corrupt fools that are at the top. Garp was loyal to the Marines and the world government, but he was not blind to their faults. One of the reasons he wanted Luffy, and the other two, to join the Marines was because he knew that they had enough potential to become incredibly strong, to the point that could start the much-needed revolution the Marines needed to be the true force of justice he knew they used to be. Man, I can't wait until I am strong and old enough to become a pirate. Garp paused and he turned towards Luffy with an angry expression on his face. What did you say, brat? He shouted as he hit Luffy over the head with his fist, sending Luffy sprawling to the floor with a smoking lump growing from the top of his head where he had been hit. If you think you are going to become a good-for-nothing criminal, then you have another damn thing coming. With a growl, Luffy stood up and he glared at his grandfather with tears of pain gathering at the corner of his eyes. Hell no, you crazy geezer. I'm going to become a pirate. I'll find the biggest treasure and become Pirate King, the freest and strongest man of them all. For a moment Garp saw the outline of Gul D. Roger staring at him with that smug grin of his that he had every time he managed to escape Garp's grasp, which he hated to admit was more often than not. He growled in anger and he lifted Luffy by the scruff of his neck and raised him until he was eye level with him. With an artery throbbing on his forehead, he raised his fist and cracked his knuckles by tightening it. HM, is that so? I guess that I will have to educate you until you see the error of your ways. And that was how Luffy's education read torture disguised as training under his grandfather, Monkey D. Garp, known as Garp the Fist and Vice Admiral of the Marines, began. 10 years passed ever since Garp began Luffy's training. Garp spent most of that time teaching Luffy how to fight, both with his fists and legs and using his lightning powers, and also toughening him up so he could survive there. Garp tried his best to make Luffy decide to join the Marines in the future. He even taught him the Rokushiki to tempt him to join, but it was all for naught. To this day, Garp was cursing both Shanks for influencing Luffy and his family's well-known stubborn streak. In the end, Garp had to give up on that endeavor, but he did his best to at the very least make sure Luffy was a passably decent man with an uncorrupted sense of justice. He was successful. To put it in the simplest of terms, if Luffy was honest with himself, he didn't really like using the Rokushiki because they were developed by the world government. Even though he had mastered the techniques to a degree that even his grandfather was pleased with, he couldn't deny they were very powerful and useful in a fight. Because of this, he had used them to base off a few techniques of his own using his lightning powers, improving them to a degree that surprised Garp when he showed them to him, which was saying something. Luffy stood on his doni, a sailboat with a lateen sail he had bought with some of his money, which had grown to 10 million bri after he used the time he was not training doing odd jobs around town. Knowing that he was going to need the money in order to procure the things he was going to need for the Grand Line, which were not cheap. He could always steal them, of course, but he was at least going to try and be a decent person about it. If the Marines as much as looked at him funny, all bets were off though. Luffy had changed a lot in the past 10 years. His hair had grown to the point it reached the nape of his neck and almost framed his face. He had grown to height of 6 foot 1 inches thanks to the amount of physical training he did on a daily basis, and the amount of food he ate, which was actually more of a necessity than something he did for pleasure, since using his lightning powers required a lot of energy, which he got through eating. He was also quite muscular, but with a lithe build, since he leaned for speed rather than power. He was wearing a red button-up, sleeveless vest, black jean pants, brown boots, a yellow sash around his waist that held his saber and a flintlock pistol. His straw hat was, as always, on top of his head. Thanks for everything, everyone, he shouted as he waved at those that had come to see him off, which included Makino, Mayor Woodslap, along with other inhabitants of the village, and Curly Dadden and some of her bandit minions. He smiled in melancholy as he saw that Curly Dadden was fighting back tears as she looked at him finally setting out on his own. He was extremely grateful to her for taking him, Ace and Sabo in, feeding them and giving them a roof for all those years whenever Garp was away on marine business. He knew that despite her rough exterior, she truly cared for them, and she wouldn't change what happened in the past, the good and the bad, for anything in the world. Luffy stopped waving when he could only see dots in the distance, and he turned around and sat down, his hand grasping the tiller almost absently as he stared straight ahead. Let's see. I have enough provisions to last me for about 1 week. That should be enough to last me until Shell's Town, where I should be able to restock again. Gosh, and if I'm lucky I'll run into Iron Mace Alvida. She's rumored to sail the waters between here and Shell's Town. I'm sure she's got a lot of useful things I could steal, and her bounty could be a nice addition to the amount of money I already have. Shishishishi. Luffy then used his compass and map in order to set his sailboat in direction towards Shell's Town. When he was done, he leaned back and closed his eyes to take a nap, only to pause and sigh annoyance a few moments before the boat was suddenly rocked violently as the waters churned. There was a roar, and Luffy opened his eyes to see a brown-scaled sea king that vaguely resembled a barracuda and could easily swallow him and his boat whole, leering down at him with hunger in its intelligent red and yellow eyes. It lunged towards him, its maw opened wide as it made to eat him, and Luffy was about to use one of his many lightning techniques to easily off it when an idea occurred to him. This Sea King, or as it was better known by the inhabitants of Fuchsia Village, the Lord of the Coast, caused a lot of issues for the many fishermen, eating the fish and occasionally the fisherman when it was feeling particularly hungry. Still, as intelligent as it was, the Sea King was still an animal, and Luffy couldn't bring himself to kill it just because it was following its instinct. So Luffy decided that he should make something useful out of it. Locking eyes with the incoming sea monster, Luffy glared at it as he brought forth his Heishoku haki, pining it in place with the force of his will. After a few moments of clashing wills, which Luffy won easily due to the Sea King being an animal despite its intelligence, the monster seemingly calmed down and it slowly approached Luffy, bowing its massive head in submission the moment it reached the boat. Luffy laughed as he roached forward and rubbed the Sea King's head affectionately. Shishishishi. I think I found myself a new pet. What should I name you, HM? You a boy? Luffy asked, and the Sea King shook its head, clearly understanding the question. A girl then? The Sea King nodded almost eagerly. So, how about Nina as your new name? I think it's a cute, yes. The newly named Nina purred in apparent agreement and happiness. Luffy laughed and he patted Nina in the head. It's settled then. From now on you are Nina and the first member of my crew. Your job is going to be to make sure that we are always on course, okay? Luffy said as he pulled out a thick rope from one of the many chests that contained what he had taken with him. He wrapped it around Nina tightly, who looked on curiously at her new master. Luffy then pointed in the direction he was supposed to be headed. Make sure I'm always headed in that direction and stay submerged unless I tell you otherwise or call you, all right. Nina crooned and nodded before diving to the water, and Luffy laughed in delight as his doni began to move almost twice as fast as before. At this pace it was going to take 4 days instead of a week to reach Shell's Town. Opting to tame Nina instead of simply killing her turned out to be best course of action he could have taken. With a laugh, Luffy settled back, putting his feet on top of the chest that contained his money and tilted his straw hat down until it covered his eyes. Finally, he could take a nap. A000. HM. So Iron Mace Alvida's base is indeed here, muttered a beautiful orange-haired girl with brown eyes. She was wearing white and blue shirt that strained against her big and perky chest and a tan skirt that barely covered half of her thighs. She was sitting in a small boat as she looked at her map and compass. Judging by the wind and where I am, I should be reached the island in which she is at in 2 days, and I have more than enough food to last me that long. She then grinned as she looked up, her brown eyes gleaming with greed. I know I'm no match for her, but I'm skilled enough to sneak in and steal all her money. After that I will head to the marine base at Shell's Town and steal a map on how to get to the Grand Line, where I should be able to get what I need to reach the BH. 100 million I need, she said to herself with determination as she stared straight ahead, her hand unconsciously tightening around the map she was holding. A000. 2 days later, and a grinning Luffy watched from the distance as a small island appeared on the horizon. The reason why he was grinning was because he could see a large pink ship anchored pretty close to the shore. It had 4 sails, one higher than the other 3. Each sail had a pink heart, and the ship itself had 2 hearts on each side. The figurehead was of a duck, and its flag had a Jolly Roger of traditional design, with the exception being that the skull was depicted from the side and it had a heart on it. That's got to be Alvida's ship. The rumors about her being here are true. I hope that the rumors about her appearance are exaggerated, though, he thought with a grimace as he recalled the many unflattering things the people that had seen the female pirate said about her. He shook his head and cupped his hand over his mouth. Nina, he shouted and waited. A few seconds later, his pet Sea King gently emerged from the ocean and stared up at him almost adoringly. Take me around that island over there so I can get in without being seen, please, he requested. Luffy learned that the more affectionate and kinder he was to Nina, the easier it was to get her to do something. Feeding her was of no issue since she could easily snatch the many fishes that strayed too close to her. Truthfully, he wondered why more pirates didn't get Sea Kings as their pets. Oh yeah, that's right. Almost no one had access to Heishoku, and even fewer were crazy and uncaring enough, which obviously Luffy was, to attempt to tame a sea king to make it function as a pet in a glorified towing submarine. With a croon and a nod, Nina submerged back into the ocean and followed Luffy's instructions perfectly. She towed him around the island and kept him at a distance at which those that were currently there had to be specifically looking for something in the horizon to spot him. After he was facing the island at an angle at which he could still see the sails of Alvida's ship but was practically behind them, Luffy ordered Nina to get him closer to the shore. When he was only about 100 meters away, he commanded Nina to stop, and she raised her head to look at him curiously. He grinned at her as he patted her head. "I'll go into that island and beat the pirates that are there and take their treasure. That means that it's highly probable that we are going to change ships. Since there's barely enough space for me in the Doni as it is, I want you to slowly go back around the island and approach the pink ship while I deal with them." Nina nodded in agreement, and Luffy, after patting her head once more much to her pleasure, gave her a two-fingered salute before his body suddenly began to spark with yellow electricity. His body turned into a bolt of lightning that in the blink of an eye, and with the muffled sound of cracking thunder, closed the distance between the boat and the shore before it turned back into Luffy. All of this happened under the interested eyes of Nina, who, after a few moments, gave the Sea King equivalent of a shrug before she submerged and began to swim around the island slowly in direction of the pink monstrosity. Back with Luffy, he was whistling a jaunty tune as he uncaringly walked through the light forest that made up the inside of the island, looking around in a bored fashion. To be honest, this island is perfect for a pirate to set base. It's unassuming and out of the way. I ran into it due to pure luck. Now if Alvida would paint her ship in colors that were less eye-catching, I would call her smart, he thought in amusement. As he got closer to where he had seen the ship anchored at, Luffy came across a crudely made and quite ugly boat. He grimaced a bit at the sight. "Damn, whomever built this coffin doesn't even know the basics of carpentry. I'm pants at it, but even I could build something nicer looking than this," he thought with some derision and shaking his head as he continued to walk forward. Eventually, he reached the edge of the forest and he peered in interest to see what he's got to work with. He saw two warehouses, the two of them made out of wood, probably procured from the trees of this same island, but only one of them was painted. As he watched on, he raised an eyebrow in interest when he saw a beautiful orange-haired woman with quite the buxom figure that looked to be around his age, perhaps a year older. As she looked around, obviously looking for someone that could spot her, she caught sight of him and her eyes widened in alarm when she saw him. Luffy just grinned pleasantly at her and waved almost cheekily. When he saw her visibly calm down and wave back at him, a wary look on her pretty face, he proceeded to point at her, then made the universal motion for money with his hand, did the universal motion for stealing with his hand, and finally pointed in the direction of Alvida's ship. It seemingly took a moment for the girls to understand him, but she eventually slowly nodded with narrowed eyes, grin widening. Luffy pointed at her, then made the motion of with his hand of her sneaking in, and then pointed at himself, then at Alvida's ship, and did the explosion motion with both his hands, with facial expression and all, which seemingly got a chuckle out of her. This time she understood immediately that he was telling her that he was going to make a distraction while she sneaked in and took the treasure. She nodded almost eagerly. When he requested for the loot to be split in half between them, however, she looked almost angry, but she surprised him when she reluctantly agreed. Luffy watched as the girl got inside the unpainted warehouse through a window, and he took that as his cue to act. He confidently walked forward, going through the small alley created by the two warehouses, and he stood in front of them, grin in place and hand inside his pockets. He idly noticed that Alvida's ship looked even uglier up close. "Boy, I'm here to steal Alvida's treasure and to see if she is as ugly and fat as she is rumored to be. Can someone please tell her to come out?" he shouted at the top of his lungs. Eerie silence was his initial answer. Inside the warehouse, as she quickly put berry coins and papers along with some precious jewels too. The orange-haired girl snorted in amusement as she heard the voice of the strange and very handsome, might she add, man that had spotted her and seemingly teamed up with her to steal from Alvida. She knew that she could have been able to easily pull this hit off without any help whatsoever, but she deduced that him functioning as decoy was a very welcomed help. Besides, half of this treasure was even more of what she was hoping to get, and though she was tempted to run away with all the money, she had given her word that they were going to split it, and unlike pirate scum, she was true to her word. Back with Luffy, he only had to wait for a few moments before a high-pitched scream of rage was heard from the ship, and he watched on in amusement as about 24 men came from the ship and 4 came out of the painted warehouse that was on his right side. They all had angry and, curiously enough, horrified expression on their faces. Well, all of them except for a scrawny and small pink-haired boy wearing round frame glasses. That one just looked horrified. "Who the fuck do you think you are to speak such lies about me, huh?" bellowed the same voice that had screeched in a big and round blur shot from the ship, somewhat impressing Luffy with its nimbleness despite the amount it obviously weighed. The blur landed right behind the conglomeration of pirates, and Luffy grimaced as he caught sight of Alvida. If anything, those rumors about her were understated. She was a tall and very obese woman with long wavy black hair and freckles on her cheeks. She wore a white cowgirl hat with a large red plume, a red neckerchief, a pink plaid shirt, and a blue captain's coat over it. She wore rings on her fingers, and her long, sharp fingernails had red polish. She had a purple sash with a flintlock pistol tucked in it and some jewels. She also wore graying pants and red shoes with gold buckles. Luffy just smirked at her. "Bae, I'm just an honest man who wants your treasure and cash in your bounty. I was only morbidly curious about your appearance, since it was spoken of so much when you were mentioned, but after seeing you myself, I can only say you are even uglier than I thought you were." Ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. He laughed merrily. Jaws hit the floor at Luffy's words, and a vein popped across Alvida's forehead and back of her hand as she brandished her spiked mace threateningly. "Why you? I am the most beautiful woman in all the seas. Men, teach this idiotic fool what we do to those that dare speak lies about my beautiful self," she bellowed, pointing at him with her mace. Without hesitation and war cries, Alvida's crew, with the notable exception of the pink-haired boy wearing glasses, charged at Luffy brandishing swords, knives, and many types of blunt-type weapons. With a menacing grin on his face, Luffy grasped the handle of his saber with one hand and reached for his flintlock pistol with his left. As the pirates approached him, Luffy slowly began to unsheath his sword. The orange-haired girl, hearing this, curiously peered outside from one of the windows, and her eyes widened in horror when she saw the entirety of Alvida's crew charging at the man that was supposed to just distract them, not get himself killed. Before guilt over the fact that she had basically agreed to send him to his death, even though it had been his idea, could settle in, she was forced to gasp again when in the blink of an eye, he pulled out his sword, stabbed the two pirates that closed in him first in the gut in quick succession before ducking under another that swung a bat at his head, only to get shot in the face at almost point-blank range. The girl then watched, almost in a trance, as the handsome black-haired man single-handedly fought and defeated the entirety of Alvida's crew, laughing as he dished out pain, suffering, and death in a manner that was almost beautiful to watch. He was graceful and quick, slashing them with his sword or striking them down using his elbows, knees, or feet when he could after dodging their attacks, and sometimes retaliating with a lethal shot of his pistol that always caught its target in the head or the chest, killing them instantly as their brains or heart respectively got damaged irreparably. Luffy, meanwhile, had gotten bored pretty quickly when these guys proved to be not even worth being called a warm-up. So, it was with a disappointed look on his face that he buried his right fist into the face of the second-to-last pirate, caving it in and sending him to La La Land, only to turn around and kick the last pirate across the face with such strength that he broke his neck and killed him instantly. With a dull look on his face, Luffy locked eyes with Alvida, the members of her crew either dead, dying, groaning in pain, or in blissful unconsciousness as they laid on the sand of the shore. Was that all? Utterly shocked, Alvida could only take a step back as she growled in anger. She then noticed that one of her crew had not moved in to attack him when gave the other, and she turned towards him and saw that he was giving the black-haired man that had made short work of her crew with almost contemptuous ease a look of utter shock and awe. She gritted her teeth. "Kobe, what do you think you are doing standing there? Go and kill him for your beautiful captain, you little shit." Kobe, the pink-haired boy with round-frame glasses, seemed conflicted as he looked between the bored-looking Luffy, the defeated members of Alvida's crew, and Alvida herself. After repeating this for a few times, Kobe's eyes hardened and he turned towards Alvida with a furious glare on his face. "No, I refuse. I'm sick and tired of the way you have treated me in the past 2 years. So if you think that I'm going to willingly walk to my death, you have another damn thing coming, you ugly bitch." Alvida's jaw hit the floor. Luffy laughed. "Ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. I like you, kid. Even though you are scared shitless of this woman, you still are brave enough to tell her what is what," he declared, noticing that despite the vehemence of his words, Kobe was still shaking in terror as he paled after realizing exactly what he just said. Alvida, after a few moments of shocked anger, bellowed in rage. "Kobe!" she screeched as she jumped toward him, her spiked mace raised over her head ready to kill him one blow for having the nerve to insult her like that, even after she had allowed him to serve under her for 2 years. Kobe yelped and froze, only able to close his eyes in preparation for his death at the hand of Alvida. A moment later, the sound of metal smacking against flesh was heard. "What?" At Alvida's incredulous shout and the fact that he had felt no pain, he opened his eyes only for them to widen when he saw the black-haired man that had defeated Alvida's crew effortlessly holding back Alvida's mace with his bare hand, the spikes not even harming him. His eyes, which had been dull before, now had a gleam of interest in them. This hammer's weight's approximately half a ton, I would say. And you are swinging it around with ease, and you can also put some strength into it. It seems like there's a bit of hope for you yet, Alvida." "Ch-ch-ch-ch-ch," declared Luffy with a laugh, not noticing the incredulous look Kobe was looking at him with, nor the fact Alvida had blushed slightly at his words. "In any case, however, I'm still going to cash in your bounty. I do need the money, you see. So, no hard feelings, eh?" Then, under the widening eyes of Alvida and Kobe, Luffy seemingly disappeared in a blur of motion, which made Alvida lose her balance for a second as she fell forward a bit, and making Kobe yelp as she jumped backwards so as to not get hit by her mace. In another blink of an eye, Luffy appeared above Alvida with his right fist cocked back. "Night, night," he sang cheekily before he lashed out with his arm, clobbering Alvida over the head with enough strength to send her splattering to the sand, kicking it up in a cloud and rendering her blissfully unconscious with probably a concussion. If her physical strength was anything to go by, she was going to be fine. "Well, that takes care of that," said Luffy with a chuckle as he clapped his hands lightly as if cleaning them after doing good job. Kobe stared at him with his mouth open, shifting his look from the unconscious Alvida to the grinning man that couldn't be too much older than him before he spoke hesitantly. "Just who the hell are you?" He had come out of nowhere and beat Alvida and her crew with an ease that was scary, and if that wasn't enough, he was also physically strong enough to stop one of Alvida's strikes, which he knew were capable of easily destroying one of the warehouses in one blow, with his bare hand. Luffy turned towards him and grinned widely as he pointed at himself with the thumb of his right hand. "My name is Monkey D. Luffy, and I am the man that's going to become the Pirate King," he declared with such conviction that for a moment, Kobe believed that this wasn't his ambition but rather an already given fact. "You are a pirate." Luffy and Kobe heard the seething voice, and they both turned towards only to see the orange-haired girl glaring at Luffy with barely repressed scorn and anger as she held 2 bags thrice her width and half her height that were obviously filled to the brim with money and other valuable things. "I thought you were just a bounty hunter, a mercenary or something like that, but you are just scum. I bet you are not even going to let me keep my cut, right?" she shouted at him. She was angry at herself as well for not even considering that the handsome and interesting-looking man could even be a pirate. Luffy stared at her with a serious expression, actually making her feel a bit self-conscious, before it softened much to her surprise and he gave her an understanding smile. "You have had some experience with the scum that thinks that just because they had a ship and a Jolly Roger on their flag they are worthy of being called a pirate?" "Yeah." When her eyes widened, he nodded. "I get that. I have dealt with worthless men like that, and let me tell you, they are not real pirates." The orange-haired girl gritted her teeth and glared at him. "How could you possibly understand? There's no way you would know if you still decided to become a pirate." Luffy smiled in sadness. "Scum that called themselves pirates were indirectly responsible for the death of one of my sworn brothers," he said, which resulted in the instant evaporation of Nami's anger as she gasped and covered her mouth with one of her hands. Even Kobe was looking at him with wide eyes. "Also, it was a man that called himself a pirate that humored me when I nagged him to take me with him on one of his voyages. Taught me that cruelty and evilness should be fought and despised and also gave me a purpose," he said, fondly remembering his time spent with Shanks. "A pirate is not a man who just sails the seas, pillages, and kill. That might come with the job because of how unforgiving this world is, but it is not what defines us. A pirate is someone who is free, someone with very few things that they won't do to accomplish their dreams. And I want to be freest of them all. I will find One Piece and become the Pirate King." "You want to find One Piece? Impossible, impossible, impossible. It's been 2 decades ever since Gold Roger was executed and no one has yet to find it. Do you want to die or something? To become the Pirate King in the pirate era is utterly impossible." "And ouch, why did you hit me?" cried Kobe as he crouched down and held the smoking lump that rose from the place that Luffy had hit him. "You were being annoying," answered Luffy simply. "Besides, I ain't afraid of dying fighting for my dream. If I die before accomplishing it, then that's all I was worth and I am okay with that. And the only reason no one has found it is because I have yet to start looking for it." "Such drive and conviction," thought Kobe admiringly. Even the orange-haired girl was giving him an admiring look, which she couldn't help since her previous worldview had been shattered by his words. Also, she was pretty good judge of character and she could tell that this man, Monkey D. Luffy, was a good person. And he was pretty strong. Maybe. She shook her head immediately, not even letting that thought form completely. She was almost done gathering the money she needed. Asking for help after all this time would be pointless. "Luffy-san," shouted Kobe, getting the attention of the other two as he stood up. "Then that means that even I could also accomplish my dreams if I'm willing to die for it. If I'm willing to put my life in the line for it, could I become a Marine?" "A Marine?" asked Luffy, cocking his head to the side thoughtfully. For a moment, the orange-haired girl wondered if this boy was stupid, telling a man that wanted to become Pirate King that he wanted to become a part of the sworn enemies of the pirates. She was going to be shocked by him once again. "Yes, Luffy-san, I know that would make us enemies in the future, but joining the Marines and catching bad guys has always been my dream," he shouted. "Is that so?" mused Luffy before he grinned at Kobe. "Then, if you are willing to put in the hard work and not mind dying for it, then I'm sure you can become a great Marine, Kobe." He paused before shrugging his shoulders. "That is, if you don't mind the corruption and the overall cruelty disguised as absolute justice that most of them are spouting nowadays." Kobe's eyes widened. What? Even the orange-haired girl was giving him a curious and a bit scandalized look. Luffy laughed in amusement. Don't tell me that you thought all Marines were just and benevolent, right? To tell you the truth, there are more evil and cruel Marines disguising their selfish acts as justice than there are scum calling themselves pirates if you look at it in a ratio-based analysis. He paused and a dark expression appeared on his face. I should know, considering that the Marines did nothing to stop a part of the island I used to live in, the one in which the poor lived, and that was also used as a dumpster by the wealthier ones, to be burned down just because they wanted the approval of someone won from the world government. His audience gasped in shock and he smiled wanly at them. The world ain't black and white only. There are also shades of gray abound. And you don't judge people by what they are or what they say. You judge them by what they do, and it's up to you to decide whether you agree with them or not, which would then tell you what kind of person you are after you answer that question. That was what that pirate taught me. Kobe gaped at him in disbelief before he shook his head and he tightened his fist, glaring at him in defiance. I don't care. And if that's the case, then I'm going to change the Marines. If they're truly only a corrupted bunch of evil guys sanctioned by the world government, then I'm going to go there and revolutionize it if I have to, damn it. My dream is to become a Marine. A symbol of true justice. The orange-haired girl gave him an incredulous look while Luffy laughed in delight and grinned so widely at him that it looked almost ready to split his face. That's what I like to hear. You know, Gramps could use someone like you. He is also trying to change the Marines back to how they were before the current administration of the world government. Encourage them to become what they are today. Gramps, questioned the orange-haired girl, raising an eyebrow at him. Your grandfather is a member of the Marines, and yet you decided to become a pirate. What gives? Luffy laughed. Yeah, drove him up the wall every time I told him I wanted to become one. I think it was the reason why his training consisted of pummeling me and my brothers, who also wanted to become pirates, to the ground using his patented fist of love, throwing me off cliffs, tying me to flying balloons, and leaving me for months to survive in a jungle with only the clothes I was wearing, he said before laughing again. What kind of grandfather does that? Wait a second. Your name is Monkey D. Luffy, and your grandfather is on the Marines. As Kobe trailed off, Luffy grinned as realization slowly settled in him and laughed at the absolutely shocked expression on his face as he pointed a shaky finger in Luffy's direction. You are the grandson of the Monkey D. Garp, the hero of the Marines, he screeched. Even as the orange-haired girl also began to gape at him, Luffy simply nodded. Yup, that's him, the craziest and most sadistic old man if you'll ever seen. Love him to death though, said Luffy with a shrug. He then turned towards the orange-haired girl and peered at her curiously. I never caught your name now that I think about it. It's Nami, she said weakly as she tried to wrap her head around the craziness that was now surrounding her after meeting this man. Nami, huh, that's a cute name. He grinned at her and laughed as she blushed and looked away, mumbling something that he couldn't quite catch. So, where are you going? I'm headed to Shell's town. I need to cash in Alvida's bounty at the Marine base over there, and Kobe also needs to head there since he wants to join the Marine. Feeling oddly comfortable around him, which had nothing to do with the fact that the first compliment he had given her had been about her name instead of a physical aspect of her, Nami nodded. I'm also headed there. I am a thief, you see. Marine bases have a lot of money laying around in case someone goes there to cash in a bounty. Also, there is a rumor that they have a map on how to get to the Grand Line there. When he heard that, Kobe turned incredulous eyes on her. The Grand Line. Why would you want go there if you are only a thief? Haven't you heard the horror stories about that place and the monsters that sail those waters? You'll be killed. Nami shrugged her shoulders. I need to go there if I want to reach my goal. I've pretty much robbed everyone worth stealing from in East Blue. I need to go to a place where it's assured that I'm going to find the amount of money I need in one go. If that place is the Grand Line, then so be it. The money you need, not want, you say? Asked Luffy, giving her a knowing look. He chuckled when her eyes widened, and she smacked a hand into her mouth after realizing how much of herself she revealed. I don't care about that, Nami, but I sure as hell like your guts and your willingness to put your life in the line for your goals, whatever they might be. Tell you what, I know how to get to the Grand Line, and I also know that as you are now, you are going to get killed before you set sail in those waters. In exchange for, let's say, 20% of what you steal, I'll take you to the Grand Line, help you with your stealing, and train you up until you are strong enough to at least have a fair chance at surviving. I also kind of need the money, you see. Deal? Nami locked eyes with him, and she was surprised to the amount of sincerity she saw in his eyes. If I say yes, do I get to keep 80% of this haul instead of only 50% of it like we originally agreed? She probed him. She didn't know why she was even humoring him, but there was something about him that called out to her, and it had nothing to do with his handsome face and delicious-looking and ripped arms. Her gut told her that this Monkey D. Luffy could be trusted, and she trusted her instincts quite a lot. They have saved her life more times than she could count. Sure, keep all of it if you want. As a matter of fact, Luffy said with a laugh before he nudged Alvida's prone body with a foot. I'll get enough money out of this bit of excitement when I cash her bounty. I need the money, sure, but I'm not that greedy. Nami laughed with him, feeling strangely elated. Then in that case you just found yourself a partner in crime, she declared and extended one hand towards him, and she hid the pleasant shudder that ran through her entire body when she felt his calloused hand wrap almost gently around her smaller one as he shook her hand firmly, sealing their deal. Do you have a boat big enough to carry us three and all our things? Because I don't. Nope. But, he trailed off as he smiled slyly as he looked down at Alvida before he pointed at her ship. I don't think she is going to be using that ship much in the future, right? It's gonna need a complete makeover. I refuse to sail on a ship that ugly and with a duck with hearts for eyes as a figurehead of all things. And Alvida's ship is pretty well known around here, so we would surely be fired at before we even get close to Shell's town, she said dryly before she regaled Luffy with a beautiful smile as she put her hands on her hips. Her smile widened when she noticed that he blushed as he looked at her. I like how you work, Luffy. You are not that bad, even if you are a pirate. I think we can make this partnership work. Luffy laughed as he nodded in agreement. Shishishishishi. Likewise, Nami, likewise. As the two of them laughed out loud in a moment of camaraderie, Kobe hoped that relating with these two, even if it was going to be just for a few days, wouldn't ruin his chances of joining the Marines. It took them almost the rest of the day, but with forced assistance of the Alvida pirates that were not dead and could still move, Luffy managed to turn Alvida's ship into an inconspicuous one. He accomplished that by changing the painting where it had been pink to a standard tan color and where it had been white to a deep red one. He had also gotten rid of the sails with hearts and the flags that had Alvida's Jolly Roger and changed them for blank ones. He tied also their boats to the starboard and port of the ship since there was no way they were going to leave them behind, so the surviving members of Alvida's crew could use it to leave the island. They could use Kobe's ugly boat for all Luffy cared. It had been pretty funny for Luffy but horrifyingly shocking for Nami and Kobe. When Luffy had called Nina, who towed his boat towards them so he could tie it to the ship's port. While the two of them had gaped in shock and horror, Luffy went, tied his doni to the ship and retrieved his things from it and put them away. When Nami got her senses back after seeing a Sea King obeying a human and behaving like a puppy, she told Luffy where her own boat was, and he had Nina go and retrieve it so they could get her things on board as well. Luffy removed the figurehead of a duck and the two hearts that the ship had at its sides. Despite only doing that, the ship looked completely different than before and was actually decently looking. After they were done, Luffy had them load the ship with all of their provisions before knocking them out and leaving them on the shore next to the bodies of their dead crewmates. They tied up the unconscious Alvida up in a way that she couldn't get enough leverage to use her impressive strength to set herself free and put her in one of the cells that were located in the hold of the ship. The sun was starting to set when they were ready to leave, and Luffy was standing in front of the helm with Nami and Kobe after he and the pink-haired boy brought down the sails in order to allow the wind to push them forward. Nina, as was her job, was also helping moving the ship forward, this time using thicker rope of better quality that Alvida and her crew had laying around in one of the warehouses. He tied it to the ship using the windows for the cannon that were closer to the bow of the ship. He looked at the map and his compass before he spoke musingly. I think if we keep this speed, all thanks to Nina, we should be able to reaching Shell's town in about 2 days more or less. In a move that surprised Luffy, Nami took the map and compass from him as she shook her head. While that might be true in most circumstances, I'll have you know that I am also a master navigator. At this speed I can get us there in just a day and a half at the most. I still can't believe you somehow tamed a Sea King. Named it Nina and are using her to tow the ship and keep it in the right direction at all times, but that's a godsend for all navigators. Luffy stared at her profile blankly for a few moments before nodding resolutely. I have decided. You are going to be the navigator of my pirate crew, he announced with a grin. Nami turned towards him with a glare. Oh, hell no. I'm willing to travel with you because of this partnership that's going to help me get money and because you are going to take me to the Grand Line, but the moment I get my money, we are going on our different ways. She might have realized that maybe not all pirates are scum, but there was a big gap between that and willingly joining a pirate crew. I don't care. I have already decided that you are going to be my navigator, Nami. How much money do you need anyways? 100 million, she stated bluntly. Kobe spluttered to the side as his eyes widened in disbelief. Luffy whistled at the amount. Damn, that's quite a lot. How much have you gathered including today's haul? Nami replied immediately and still bluntly. Including what I stole today, I'm short around 15 million birri. Luffy grinned. Tell you what, if you agree to become my navigator, you get to keep everything you steal. You don't have to give me 20% of it. I refuse, replied Nami instantly. And I refuse your refusal. Nami turned towards him with a comically angry face with blank eyes and shark-like teeth. That's not how it works, you moron. Luffy just laughed while Kobe shook his head at their antics. After Nami made the modifications to their course and Luffy told Nina to always listen to Nami when she gave instructions about the direction they were going, and then having a very hearty dinner, the three of them decided to go to sleep. Since Luffy was going to train her, and Nami was aware that it took a lot of energy considering that she had trained herself to wield a staff in the past, she knew that she needed to get as much sleep as she could if she wanted to make the most of it. Normally, she preferred running over fighting, but she also knew that the more tricks she had up her sleeve, the bigger the chances she had at survival, so she was going to at least put some effort to it. Kobe, for his part, just wanted to go to sleep now because Alvida always forced her crew to go to sleep after midnight and wake up before dawn. Now that he was free of her, he wanted to spend on his time with her as much as he could. Sleeping for a longer period of time was doing exactly that in his mind. He had gone to the first mate quarters to sleep, since Alvida's first mate had been his main tormentor when it wasn't Alvida who was doing it. Once again shocking Nami, Luffy told her that she could use the captain's quarters, which had also been given a makeover after removing everything that had Alvida's touch. His reason had been that he saw her shivering when they were outside, and he knew that the crew's quarter was no better. The captain's cabin was warmer and there was also a king-sized bed that she could use. Luffy didn't mind the cold and he actually preferred sleeping under the stars. So, after a grateful Nami thanked him and moved inside, he quickly made himself quite a big and comfy hammock with some of the unused blank sails by tying its ends to the mainmast and the foremast. He went to sleep that night with a content smile on his face. 0:00. Nami woke up the very next day feeling refreshed. Something that had not happened in a long time, and she once again thanked Luffy in her mind for giving her the captain's quarters to her. She didn't like cold temperatures. As she began to do her morning routine of showering and brushing her teeth, which she could do thanks to the utilities of Alvida's ship, she thought to herself, that's a first. I didn't even think of escaping with all the money here. Luffy has enough for me to almost reach the amount I need, but I couldn't do that to him. Despite him being a pirate, he's a genuinely nice guy and I only needed yesterday to see that. Besides, it's not like Nina was going to let me go very far if I did that, she thought to herself dryly as she put on red shirt, jean shorts and boots. She stepped out of the cabin and she smiled as the rays of the sun hit her face directly. Judging by its position, the time should be about 8. Give it or take it a few minutes. It was after that she heard a few grunts coming from the main deck and she went down the stairs towards it, only to blush pink as she saw Luffy doing handstand push-ups without his shirt on. Nami subconsciously licked her lips as she saw the muscles. All of them, she idly noted, rippling with his movement. Oh, Nami likes very much, she thought to herself. Even though she had yet to have sex, Nami was not a stranger to the matters of the flesh, having using her body and attractiveness to distract and lure in her targets. So, she had no issues with appreciating something attractive when she saw it, and Luffy was definitely the most attractive male she had ever seen, period. And 2000. Declared Luffy, his voice barely strained, before he pushed himself towards the air with his arms, flipping in a motion that when he landed had him facing Nami, giving her a look of his front, which was as ripped as his back, with six-pack abs and all that. The fact that he was glistening with sweat and his damp hair was sticking to his forehead and neck only made him look hotter in Nami's very objective and truthful opinion. Luffy grinned when he saw Nami standing there looking at him intently. Good morning, Nami. Sleep well? After a few moments she shook her head and nodded at him. Yeah, best sleep I had in a while, to be honest, she said as she approached him. She tried to not show how disappointed she was when he dried his body, face and hair with a towel before putting on his red button-up shirt. So, how are you going to go about this training me thing? She asked with a raised eyebrow. Luffy grinned. First we are going to spar so I can see just exactly at what level you are. After that we'll see. There are a few techniques you'll definitely need to learn if you want to survive the Grand Line. We'll start with that as a base and build up from there. Nami blanched as a nervous expression appeared on her face. I have to fight you, she almost squeaked, remembering how ruthless he had been when facing Alvida's crew yesterday. Watching him kill, maim and break them so effortlessly had been as horrifying as it had been awe-inspiring. The thought of fighting Luffy was one that terrified her. Luffy, looking at her expression and quickly deducing what she was thinking, was quick to assure her. Hey, don't worry, I'm not going to fight you like I did with those guys yesterday. That was a real fight to the death. They were trying to kill me, so I had to respond in kind. This is just a spar. I'm just going to be testing your skills. I won't even be using my sword and my pistol, so relax. Visibly sighing in relief, Nami nodded. Okay, let's do it then, she said before she walked back a bit and making sure that she was considerably far away from the main mast. The ship that used to belong to Alvida was big, so there was enough space at the main deck that they could use for the spar without fear of getting close to something that might make it more difficult for them to spar. She pulled out her retractable bot staff and held it in the natural stance she felt more comfortable in. Luffy took one look at her and smiled in approval. You were self-taught. She nodded at his question. I can see that because of your stance. You look very at home standing like that and holding your bow staff. While not having a formal style would normally be detrimental, I find it that instinctually doing what feels best coupled with actual fighting experience beats any kind of formal training. You have fought a lot in the past, haven't you? Nami scowled, recalling the many things she has been through in the past, both before and after Arlong. She simply nodded her head. Yes, giving her another smile. Luffy slowly slipped into a defensive stance seamlessly. All right then, come at me with everything you've got. I want to test your strength, speed, reflexes, flexibility, defensive ability, and dodging ability. Be prepared for anything. Nami tightened her hold around her staff and she went on the attack. It didn't take long for Luffy to determine at what level she was as he evaded, blocked, and parried her attacks. For someone without the training required to become truly a force to be reckoned with, meaning within what could be reached by a normal human, Nami was above average in strength, being comparable to Alvida's own strength. She fell a bit behind in the speed department, but she made up for it with her decent reflexes, flexibility, and dodging ability. She wasn't that good when it came to her defensive abilities, though. Honestly, she was better than he was expecting her to be. In comparison to yesterday's guys, Luffy estimated that she would have been able to take on 3 or 4 of them at the same time, which would have been more than enough to survive here in East Blue. However, since she was planning to go to the Grand Line, she needed much more than that. Luckily for her, Nami had ran into him and he knew more than enough to get her up to snuff. He ducked under the swing that was coming towards his head from the right side, and after following the momentum of her swing into spin, which she used to get her staff in position to stab the end of it towards his core, he simply grabbed it before it could hit him. He was grinning widely, not even sweating. Meanwhile, Nami was panting harshly and was starting to sweat. The spar had gone for about 5 minutes or so, but it had been enough for Luffy to see all that. You have a very strong foundation, Nami. You are actually better than what I expected you would be. He praised her, laughing when she smirked and almost preened. However, you are still far from where you need to be if you want to survive in the Grand Line. First of all, you need to increase your physical abilities way beyond where they are now. In second order, you need to learn a few techniques that will increase your combat ability. I'm going to show you those techniques in a short moment, so you can see what your goal is. And lastly, but not as pressing, the bow staff is a very good weapon, but you might want to look into getting a weapon that is more prone to cause permanent damage, like a glaive or a spear. Nami nodded in understanding. That seems sensible enough. As long as I don't end up like a walking hulking mass of muscles, I'm willing to do whatever, she said honestly. There were a few things she was not willing to do to increase her chances of survival, and one of them was jeopardizing her wonderful and sexy figure. Wouldn't even dream of it, he joked after giving her an appreciative look, both pleasing her and making her blush at the confirmation that he indeed found her attractive enough to at least take notice. Luffy laughed at her and shook his head before backing away a bit. Now, pay close attention. These are the techniques I feel you should learn, which lean more towards your set fighting style. The first one, and easiest to learn, is Zoro, he said before disappearing only to reappear on forecastle deck in a blur of motion. In the same blur he went back to where he was. As Nami gaped at him, he grinned. It consists of having enough leg strength to move at extremely high speeds by kicking off the ground at least 10 times in the blink of an eye. Then we have Jeppo, he said before he jumped up, only to continue jumping up as he kicked off the air itself, causing Nami to gasp as she saw this. After a few moments, Luffy allowed himself to fall back to the deck. After you have achieved enough leg strength, use Zoro. You only need to take it a couple of levels above that in order to be capable of using Jeppo. Luffy then walked back towards her and stopped when he was at a distance that she could strike at him with a staff. And finally, we have Kami-e. This technique allows you to dodge attacks by making your body extraordinarily flexible, enough that it would seem like you are floating or bending your body like paper. Attack me as fast as you can. After a few moments of gathering her wits, Nami began to attack Luffy again, and this time he only dodged, and she immediately noticed the difference from before, as his moves were now even smoother and more graceful than before, his body looking exactly like he said it would when he explained what the technique did. After telling her to stop when he deemed that she had seen enough, Luffy smirked at her. So, what do you think? Do you really think I will be able to do that? She asked him dubiously. She was all for learning them, immediately seeing how those techniques would both increase her abilities in a fight and her chances at survival, but being able to move faster than what the normal eye could follow, jumping from the air itself and become flexible enough to move your body like it was made of jelly was way above of what she considered to be possible before. Perhaps he... No, it looks too good to be true. Luffy nodded his head, easily waving off her concern. Of course, with enough dedication, time, and the correct type of training, anyone can learn those techniques. So, as long as you do as I say and don't slack off, you'll be able to use them in about 6 weeks' time if you don't skip a day of training, that is. With a sigh of acceptance, Nami nodded and Visible braced herself. All right then, I'm ready. Let's get to it. I have to check the course and then count the money I stole to get an exact amount of how much it was that I stole." Luffy's answering grin was foreboding enough to make Nami shudder, and not in a good way. A few minutes later, Koby joined them and Luffy managed to convince him to join Nami in training. The poor boy did so with some eagerness at first, but later was regretting it, both because Luffy was an absolute bastard sadist when it came to training, and because it turned out that Nami was even more terrifying than Alvida when she was angry. She was none too happy with Luffy after he put them through strenuous leg exercises and evasion practice that consisted in him throwing pebbles continuously at them. That day, Nami only managed to check the course before she had to lay down because of how sore and tired she was. She fell asleep cursing Luffy to Kingdom Come, and Koby passed propped against the mainmast and without even eating as he was too tired to even move. Luffy, in contrast, was no different in how content he was feeling the moment sleep claimed him as he laid on his hammock. "0-0. So that's Shell's town," said Luffy musingly as he stared at the island from where he stood leaning against the railing of the forecastle deck of the ship. They were about 4 kilometers away from the island that housed it. It was mostly completely flat, and there were very few trees from what Luffy could see. The tallest buildings there were the 2 main ones that made up the marine base, and they were surrounded by the buildings that made up Shell's town proper. "We arrived exactly in the time Nami said we would. That's my navigator for you, all right. I'm going to kill you," she growled from where she stood at his side, wearing a long-sleeved thin shirt and jeans to hide the welts and bruises that were the result of her not being able to dodge the pebbles Luffy threw at them yesterday and today. She had been angry at him yesterday for the torture masked as training he had them do, but the fact that he forced the same thing on them today had her wanting to strangle him and drown him. "And for the umpteenth time, I'm not your damned navigator." "Of course you are, silly," he said with a laugh. He ignored her snarl of anger, whimper of pain as he turned towards Koby. "What can you tell me about Shell's town?" "I only know that there was a marine base stationed here." Koby groaned, and with visible effort, he raised his head to look at him. "Not long ago that was the only notable thing of this place, but a few days ago there were rumors that pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro was seen here." Luffy's eyes gleamed in interest. "Oh, I've heard of him. He's supposed to be the strongest bounty hunter here in East Blue. I wonder if I should recruit him for my crew," he spoke thoughtfully. Koby's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you for real? It's been said that he's like a monster and that he's evil. It would never work out for you." "You don't know that for sure," he said with a laugh. "If he turns out to be a decent enough guy, I'll definitely recruit him. It's guy like him that I want for my crew after all." He then turned back towards Nami, ignoring Koby's mutters of him being crazy. "So, this what we are going to do. I'll go first and cash in Alvida's bounty. After that I'll return to the ship with the money and go back to make a ruckus to make a distraction for you to sneak into the base and steal as much money as you can." Seemingly forgetting her anger and soreness, Nami smiled brightly as she gave him a thumb up. "That's plan I can easily fall behind." Luffy chuckled at her one-track mind when money was involved. "Besides, I need to start making a name for myself as a pirate. Raiding a marine base should be a good way to start, right?" "Shishishishi. Guys," spoke Koby hesitantly as he raised his hand. "You do know that I am planning to join the Marines, right? I am afraid I can't allow you to do that now that I know you are serious about it. We might be friends, but that's something I can't condone in good consciousness." After he finished speaking, Luffy and Nami exchanged blank looks before they turned towards Koby with identical evil grins on their faces. At this moment, that Koby knew. He fucked up. A few minutes later he was whimpering and struggling against his bonds as he was being lowered to the sea in Luffy's boat. There were a few barrels with food and water to make it seem like he had set out on his own towards Shell's town. By the time he managed to untie himself and set the sails to make it to the island, Luffy and Nami would be long gone. As they made distance between them, Nami waved merrily at Koby. "You are a nice guy, Koby, but I won't allow you to prevent me from getting my money." The fact that she was going to steal the money from whom it actually belonged wasn't brought up. As far as Nami was concerned, all money belonged to her and she was just allowing everyone else to have it until she decided to take it back. "And I am a pirate. This shouldn't come off as a surprise for you," added Luffy while grinning like a loon. "Besides, this actually works for you. Now no one would suspect you are even related to pirates since no one is going to see you get off the same ship as me, so you should be thanking me." Since he was gagged, Koby's answering shout was just muffled gibberish. After that, Nami took control of the ship while Luffy had untied Nina from it and relieved her from her work, telling her that she could do whatever she wanted as long as she stayed within hearing range and submerged. After an affectionate pat and a loving purr, Nina disappeared to the depths of the oceans to do what sea kings did when they weren't terrorizing humans or, in Nina's case, towing a ship and keeping it on course. When they were just about to dock, Luffy went to the lower deck and retrieved a pouch of money just in case and took out Alvida, who was still passed out, which told Luffy that either he hit her harder than he thought he did or that she wasn't as resilient as her physical strength would suggest. They both lowered the anchor and tied the ship to the dock using some of the rope they used to tie Nina to the ship, and when they were set after folding the sails and lowering the flag, they stepped towards the dock. Luffy, who was dragging an unconscious Alvida who had her head covered up with a bag, and Nami approached the dockmaster. "How much for leaving our ship here?" he asked simply. The dockmaster gave him and his cargo a weary look before he leered perversely at Nami, which ended when she grinned threateningly at him and made as if she was going to reach for some kind of weapon. He hurriedly turned towards Luffy, his face pale. For how long you are going to stay? We should be leaving by midday more or less. Then in that case it's going to be 4,000 buries. 1,000 per hour. Nami looked ready to argue, but Luffy had no issues with it, knowing that the price was about the same, perhaps a bit cheaper, back in Fuchsia. "Here you go," he told him after holding Nami back and passing him the amount it was required. The man quickly took the money and ushered them away after giving Nami a fearful look. "That was a complete scam. That's almost double the amount of what I usually have to pay," she complained, not mentioning the fact that she would always flirt with the dockmasters to get them to lower the prices for her. "The larger the ship, the bigger the amount that needs to be paid to use the docks," said Luffy in a way of explanation. He ignored the shocked looks being sent his way as the inhabitants of the town noticed that he was dragging what seemed to be an unconscious Iron Mace Alvida, who, despite having her face covered, was still recognizable because here in the East Blue she was the only woman with her dimension. "Besides, we have to keep as low as profile as we can until I can cash in this one's bounty and then attack the base if you want to get away with stealing from the base with no one being the wiser about it being you." Nami hated the fact that he was right. "Fine, but from now on any time that spending money is involved, then I'm going to be the one calling the shots. Is that clear?" Luffy raised an eyebrow at her. "Does that mean that apart from navigator, you also want to be the treasurer of my crew?" "Yes," she replied instantly. A moment later, and noticing Luffy's grin, she began to rapidly shake her head. "I mean, no, I just don't want to pay more than what it's needed for stuff. Money is important, you know. And for the last time, I am not your navigator, Luffy. Whatever you say, Nami." After a few minutes, Luffy and Nami split up. Luffy made his way towards the marine base while Nami, to kill time more than anything else, decided, on Luffy's suggestion, to gather information on what kind of marines inhabited the base and to confirm whether or not pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro was actually here. 000. It didn't take long for Luffy to reach the marine base, and after stating his business at the front door and showing them Alvida's face as proof, he was quickly ushered inside. The marine that was leading him towards the building kept giving him suspicious looks because of his getup and his weapons, but thanks to Luffy's goofy grin he didn't do more than that. While they were on the path and passing a wired fence, Luffy took notice of a figure tied up to a wooden cross. "He's got an aura of true strength and intimidation around him," thought Luffy to himself as he looked at him. The man was wearing black trousers tucked into black boots, a plain white t-shirt with 3 buttons undone at the collar, a green haramaki around his waist, and a black bandana tied around his head. He also looked pretty scuffed up, his body covered in bruises, scraps, and dirt. He obviously looks strong, and the way he is tied up it wouldn't have been too difficult to set himself free. So, why is he still there? Despite his curiosity, Luffy continued following the marine. He first took him to a holding cell in which he deposited Alvida after he took the bag that covered her head and the ropes that kept her tied up away. Just because he didn't like marines, he neglected to tell them that without her being tied in the manner in which she was, it was going to be a piece of cake for her to escape from the cell using her strength. After that, Luffy was taken to the treasurer of the base, who blandly thanked him for turning the bounty of a known and dangerous criminal before he proceeded to count the money, all of it in paper format, in front of him. After that was done, the money was put in a suitcase and they gave it to him. Luffy just grinned at them and told them that it was a pleasure to make business with them before he merrily began to make his out. 5 million buries richer than he used to be when he had come in. As he was making his way out, Luffy once again turned towards the man tied up against a cross, only to raise his eyebrow in interest when he saw that he was joined by a little girl with brown hair that looked to be pretty scared, and a skinny and lanky-looking man with light blonde hair shaped like a sideways oval on top of his head and a cleft chin that was wearing a purple tuxedo and white shoes, who was being flanked by 2 marines in their standard garb. From where he was standing, Luffy could see what was happening and hear what they were saying. "Well, hello, little girl. These rice balls look pretty tasty," said the blonde man with a nasally voice as he snatched the rice balls the girl had been presenting to the man that was tied up, who now Luffy noticed was glaring daggers at the blonde man. The little girl lost her scared look and she glared up at the blonde. "Hey, stop that. Those rice balls aren't for you. I made them for Zoro Onii-chan." "Hey, so that's pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. That's one mystery solved, I guess. I'm still wondering why he has yet to set himself free if he is as strong as he looks and also supposed to be. There's more to this than him being captured and put in display like that to humiliate him, he thought as he continued to watch on. The blonde man ignored her as he took a bite of one, only to grimace as he spat them back out. Bleg, you put too much sugar in it. You are supposed to put salt in these things. The girl visibly teared up. But I thought they would taste better if they were sweet. How could someone eat something like this? Damn it. He threw the rice balls to the ground and began to stomp on them. Luffy scowled at this, and he noticed that Zoro's glare had also intensified as his lips curled into a snarl of anger. Stop it. Stop. He won't be able to eat them anymore, cried the little girl in distress as she knelt on the ground to try and stop the blonde man from stomping on the rice balls, which was moot since they were pretty much ruined at this point. After he finished stomping on them, the blonde man smiled mockingly down at her. Don't worry, the ants will surely eat them, he said before laughing in a condescending fashion. Even though this man was quickly earning his ire because of how cruel he was being, Luffy still kept enough wits about him to remain in control of himself. It was because of this that he also noticed that the ropes were straining against Zoro's muscles even if he was visibly restraining himself from breaking them so he could beat up the blonde man if the glare on his face directed towards him was anything to go by. Now crying, the little girl looked up at the blonde man. That's so cruel. I worked really hard to make them. Awa, don't cry. It's no wonder why I hate brats so much. He mocked her before he pointed at a sign that was right next to the cross to which Zoro was tied to. It's all your fault, you know. Didn't you see what's written here? Anyone who helps a prisoner will be charged with the same crime. Marine Captain Morgan. Luffy took notice of how the two Marines in standard garb and the little girl flinched when the blonde man read Captain Morgan aloud. The blonde then knelt down in front of the girl and cupped her chin as he leered malevolently at her. You know how scary my dad can be, right? You would have gotten the dead penalty if it was him who found you here. When the girl paled, he laughed aloud and stood after patting her head condescendingly. He turned towards one of the Marines that was flanking him. Boy, throw this brat out. Huh. The man looked shocked and appalled as he looked at the blonde man. The blonde man quickly got in his face and grabbed him by the collar of his uniform. I'm telling you to throw her out of here. Are you trying to disobey me? I'm telling my dad. And you know what will happen to you if I do. The man, now visibly scared, just nodded his head shakily. Aye, sir. Luffy watched as the man knelt down in front of the girl, who was now shaking, and whispered something to her that had her calm down a bit and nod minutely to him. He watched as the man allowed her to brace herself before he grabbed her by the scruff of her dress and threw her with only enough strength to make her cross the wall. Taking note of this, Luffy quickly used sword when in a blur of silent motion he appeared at the other side of the wall just in time to catch the little girl by gently stopping her momentum and tucking her into his chest. She looked up at him with confused and tearful eyes for a moment before she realized what had happened. She smiled happily at him as he set her down. Thank you, Onii-chan. You're welcome, he responded with a grin before he pointed towards wall. Hey, did you sneak in to give that tied-up guy some food? If he is being held up by the Marines, then that means that he is a criminal and a bad guy, right? Luffy knew that this wasn't the case, but he was curious to know what happened. No, he's not, denied the girl vehemently with a shake of her head. Zoro Onii-chan didn't do anything wrong. It's just that the people of this town are afraid of him because of his reputation and because he looks scary. He got arrested because of me. He killed Helmeppo's pet wolf because he was letting it run around town and it was scaring everyone. It was about to bite me when Zoro Onii-chan put it down. Luffy raised an eyebrow at her. So, he got arrested because he killed someone's pet wolf. The girl nodded. Yeah, Helmeppo is Captain Morgan's son and everyone is afraid of them because disobeying them will get you executed and Helmeppo takes advantage of that to do what he wants in this town. I see, replied Luffy before he grinned and ruffled the girl's hair, earning a cute and annoyed pout from her. Thank you for telling me that. Now, go home and stay away from here, all right? We don't know what that Helmeppo guy will do to you if he sees you lurking around here after he ordered you thrown out like that, do we? The girl hurriedly nodded, thanked him again and scurried away further into the town. Luffy then turned towards the wall and using Zoro again he found himself standing a few feet away from Zoro in blur of motion. Helmeppo and his two marine guards were nowhere to be seen at the moment. Luffy stared at Zoro for a few moments and he grinned when he saw Zoro raise his head to look at him with some surprise in his eyes. Who in the fuck are you? Luffy's grin widened. My name is Monkey D. Luffy, and you are pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro, and I have decided you'll be joining my pirate crew. Zoro scoffed. Pirate? Heh, so you just gave up on life and became a crook, huh? Nope, replied Luffy, grin not lessening. It's my dream to become the pirate king and there ain't nothing wrong with it. Your dream? Huh, I can't judge for that even if you are surely a fool because of it, said Zoro before he grinned nastily. So, you gonna set me free and force me to join you then? He challenged him. Luffy shrugged his shoulders. If that's what you want then I can set you free now. You'll be joining my pirate crew in any case though. You are really a fool, chuckled Zoro before he shook his head. I'm not going to join you. I have unfinished business here. I just need to stay alive here without food or water for 21 more days, and that bastard kid promised to let me go afterwards. I'm going to stay alive no matter what, because if I can't overcome something as simple as this, then I might as well give up on the path I have chosen and kill myself. After hearing those words and the conviction behind them, Luffy's grin threatened to split his face in half. You are definitely going to become part of my crew. I'm going to wait for you to finish your businesses, even though I wouldn't put my trust in the words of trash like Helmeppo. Besides, it's not like I am in a hurry or anything, he laughed, momentarily forgetting that he was not traveling alone and that he was going to make a ruckus later so his traveling partner, who was still in denial about being the navigator of his crew, could steal this base dry of money and other valuable things. Zoro shook his head. You might as well go and find someone else to join because it ain't gonna be me, said Zoro. When Luffy just laughed and turned to walk away, he spoke again. Wait, before you go, can you pick up those rice balls and give them to me? Luffy's grin softened into a smile for a second before he knelt down and picked up the ruined rice balls. You want to eat this? They are all muddy, but I guess you can't be picky about food when you are hungry. He trailed off as he turned the ruined rice ball into an actual ball. Shut up. Just give it to me. Let me eat all of it, said Zoro, opening his mouth wide. His eyes teared and he got a strained look on his face when Luffy threw the rice ball directly into his mouth and he began to chew. After visibly struggling to swallow it, Zoro panted in exhaustion and coughed. Tell that little girl, thank you for the food. It was delicious. The best thing I have ever eaten. Luffy's smile widened. Will do. Now he definitely wanted Zoro to be a part of his crew. A man willing to throw away his pride to make a little girl that tried to help him happy after watching her being verbally abused while being denied of the chance to help him was a man that even Shanks would approve of. His reputation and supposed strength were truthfully just an added bonus. With a grin on his face, Luffy slipped into Zoro so he could take the money back to the ship and find Nami as quick as possible so he could tell her of the change of plans. Hopefully she wouldn't be too angry with him for it. Nami had a scowl on her face as she listened to the little girl that was the owner of the restaurant in which she had gotten something to drink after she spent some time exploring the town and gathering information on the Marines here. She had been disgusted on how the leader of the Marines stationed here, a Captain Morgan, and his son Helmeppo, treated the inhabitants of the town as if they were their subjects. The fact that this confirmed Luffy's words about not all Marines being the paragons of law, order, and justice only showed her that his temporary partner was someone sincere. And that was when this tall Onii-chan wearing a straw hat caught me. I also told him what happened with Zoro Onii-chan before he sent me off. Nami nodded before she perked up at her words. A tall Onii-chan wearing a straw hat. Yeah. The girl nodded before cocking her head to the side. Do you know each other? Nami nodded with a strained smile on her face. You could say that, she simply answered. On the inside was another story. If that idiot has gone and done something ruin my chances of getting my money, I'm going to strangle him, she thought, not noticing that the little girl had taken a step back because she was giving off an aura of death and a vein from her forehead was pulsing. That was when she heard an annoying laugh and she turned towards it only to see everyone else making a path and quickly kneeling down and bowing for a thin blonde-haired man with a cleft chin and wearing a purple tuxedo who was swaggering through the street as if he owned it. He was also being flanked by two Marines who looked like they wanted to be anywhere but there. Who dares raise his head? I'll tell my dad. So that's Helmeppo. It's the first time I see him, but I have the urge to shove my staff up his ass, she thought to herself as she surreptitiously moved herself so she was out of sight from anyone. There was no way in hell she was going to kneel and bow before this fool even to mix in with the crowd. Do you want to be like Roronoa Zoro? I'm going to publicly execute him in 3 days. I'm going to use him to set an example for all of you. It's going to be pretty interesting. He bragged with a disgusting grin on his face. That fucking bastard, she thought angrily as she glared at him from her position. The little girl had told her about what happened with Zoro, Helmeppo, his wolf, and the deal between them. She had been surprised to hear that Zoro, other than his scary appearance and foul temper, was actually a decent guy who would sacrifice himself like to protect a little girl. To think that Helmeppo tricked him and was planning on executing him after making him spend 9 days tied up to a cross and starving had her wanting to put nails on her staff before shoving it up his ass. She was conflicted, however, as she didn't want to go and call attention to herself before she moving in to steal their money, which would be a form of sticking up to him too, to be honest. Thankfully, there was no need for her to decide. Oi, said a serious voice and all eyes turned towards it and Nami's eyes widened when she saw it was Luffy who was slowly walking towards the smug-looking Helmeppo, the bill of his hat shadowing his eyes and the corner of his mouth pulled down in a scowl. It was the first time Nami had seen him this angry and it honestly had her feeling a bit nervous because she knew what he was capable of when he wasn't being serious. Didn't you say you'll give him a month and then you'll set him free? Helmeppo didn't notice the danger he was in and just laughed in derision. Who are you? How rude. I was only joking with him. Only an idiot would believe that, he said before he began to laugh, not noticing how everyone turned to scowl at him. Nami only saw Luffy gritting his teeth before he was sinking his fist into Helmeppo's face, making it mold against it and likely breaking his nose if the cracking sound she heard was anything to go by before he was sent flying away. It was only because of his guards catching him that he didn't smack into the building at the other end of the street. I have decided, Luffy declared as everyone began to mutter in shock about who he was and the fact that he had just signed his death warrant by hitting Captain Morgan's son. I'm going to ask Zoro to join me crew. When Nami saw Luffy's eyes flickering towards where she was, she understood this was the ruckus he was going to cause. She grinned before slipping away in the direction of the marine base, momentarily ignoring the thought of how hot Luffy looked in her opinion when he went and punched that bastard right in the face. Zero, oh Zero. Luffy glared at the back of Helmeppo's head as he was being taken away by his guards, who Luffy noticed were trying to hide their grins from their charge as they did so. When they disappeared after turning around the corner of the street, Luffy turned towards the little girl he had caught and sent away a few minutes ago. She was looking up at him with even more awe than before, and he grinned at her. You know, Zoro ate your rice balls. He told me to give you his thanks and that they were delicious and the best thing he has ever eaten. Really? The little girl's eyes lit up as she heard this. Luffy nodded his head. Really? She smiled widely at him. I'm so happy. Luffy just grinned at her before he began to make his way back towards the base. He was going to take it slow since he had to give Nami enough time to get into position to get in before he started the distraction in order to give her as much time as he could. Even though this had turned personal the moment Helmeppo declared that he was going to kill Zoro anyways, and sooner than what he told Zoro he would set him free, there was no need to take advantage of the situation. The only difference now was that he was going to take a bit of personal pleasure out of it and hopefully get another crew member. Luffy arrived at the marine entrance, and with another application of Zoro he was standing in front of Zoro again. Yo, Zoro looked up only to frown when he caught sight of him. You again. Not even 10 minutes have passed. Can't you even wait as long as you said you would? No matter, I already told you that I'm not going to become a. Helmeppo just told the entire town that he was going to execute you in 3 days. He told me directly to my face that he was just joking with you and that just a fool would believe him. I told you that you couldn't trust trash like him, he told him seriously. There were moments for joking around, but this wasn't one. One look at Luffy's face and hearing the seriousness of his voice, and also knowing that doing something like that was well within what that bastard could do, made Zoro instantly believe him. That motherfucking piece of shit. I'm going to kill him, he declared with a snarl as he began to struggle to free himself. Luffy nodded. I didn't expect anything else, he said before he raised an eyebrow as Zoro continued to struggle. The ropes were straining against his strength, but it was clear that Zoro couldn't muster the strength to set himself free. Do you want help? No, I can do it myself. I'm just a bit weak since the only thing I have eaten in the past 9 days were those rice balls that girl brought. It's going to take my body a little longer to assimilate them and give me some of my strength back, but even like this I can set myself free. It's just going to take longer, he said without stopping in his struggle to get free. Luffy nodded, knowing that you didn't mess with a man's pride. I take it that your sword was taken away from you, right? Where is it? I'll go look for it while you set yourself free. Then you'll show me the strength of my new crewmate. I already told you that I ain't gonna be a damned pirate, you moron. I haven't done a single thing I have regretted in my life, and I'm sure as hell not going to start now, shouted Zoro at him. But I'll be grateful if you could get me my swords. Helmeppo took them with him when he tied me up. He has to know where they are. Luffy nodded at him. All right, I won't take long. I expect you be free by the time I come back with your swords, he said before he seemingly disappeared in a blur of motion from Zoro's perspective, much to his shock. What the hell was up with that speed? That's unreal, he thought before another thing about their recent interaction came to mind. And who the hell does he thinks he is to be ordering me around like that? Huh, he muttered in annoyance before went back to trying to set himself free. Back with Luffy, he now stood on the flagpole that was on top of the main building of Marine Base, looking down with his arms crossed and his expression blank as a bunch of Marines used a rope to bring up a statue of the taller and more muscular man that was watching on with a smug look in his eyes. He had tan skin, blonde hair, and a steel jaw. His right hand had been replaced by a huge steel axe with its handle going straight through his forearm and sticking out of his elbow without breaking his skin. He was wearing a billowing coat over a black shirt and blue stripped pants. Helmeppo, who was also there, stood up in front of the tall man with an axe for a right hand while holding a napkin to his bruised face. Dad, that kid that hit me. Why won't you help me take revenge? He screamed. His voice even more nasally than before because of his broken nose and the tears of pain that were slowly trailing down his completely bruised face. Even you haven't hit me before. The man, apparently Captain Morgan since Helmeppo had addressed him as his father, slowly turned his head towards his son. Do you know why I never hit you? He asked, speaking around the cigar he was smoking. That's because I'm your son. Morgan nodded as he slowly stood up. Yes, because you are a bastard son that's not even worth hitting. He ended the sentence with a shout before hitting Helmeppo with his left fist and sending him sprawling to the floor with a scream of pain. "Why do I have to clean up your messes?" he asked rhetorically as he began to caress his axe almost lovingly. "You can do a lot of things in my name, but I only punish those who oppose me." He then leaned down and got in his son's face while pointing at himself with his thumb. "Don't misunderstand. You are not the great one here. It's your father, me," he declared to Helmeppo, who could only look at him crying while bleeding from his nose and mouth. Morgan stood up and looked away from him. "Rumors says that a little mouse went into the execution site. Is it true?" "Huh," Helmeppo stammered. "You mean that little girl? I have already. Have you executed her?" He interrupted him with his question. No, I mean, she was just a little girl that didn't know what she was doing. I didn't think it warranted an execution." Morgan ignored him and pointed towards a Marine that had a goatee. "Hey, you, go into town and kill her. I don't care how old she is. Whoever opposes me will die." But, Captain," stammered the Marine as he paled. "She is just a little girl. I couldn't possibly do that to her." "Couldn't do it, huh?" questioned Morgan as he began to approach the man he had addressed and who had just responded in the negative to his direct order. "You're a Marine lieutenant, right? And the rank of lieutenant is lower than the rank of captain, isn't it?" "Why, yes, sir," answered the man while slowly backing away from Morgan. "Then you have no rights to go against my order," bellowed Morgan angrily. "If I order you to go do something, you go and do what I ordered you to do." "I can't, traitor," shouted Morgan as he cut down the captain with his axe, leaving a deep gash across his back and flank. The other Marines, even Helmeppo to an extent, were horrified to see this. "Never mind, for the sake of reminding the citizens, I'll go there myself," he said before he once again caressed his axe lovingly. "With this arm I rose to the rank of captain. Rank is the most important thing in the world. I am the highest ranking officer in this base, which means that I am the greatest one here. Great men don't make mistakes. Do you all agree?" "Yes, sir. You are absolutely correct, sir," replied the terrified Marines, saluting. All of them knowing that they weren't strong enough to do something against Morgan. "Behold, this is the symbol of my power," he declared, turning towards the statue of himself which was being slowly pulled up. "A statue that has been finished today after years of work. Now stand up, my great statue." At the highest point of this base, Luffy had seen and heard enough. "So, that's the symbol of your greatness, huh?" he spoke up, alerting everyone of his presence and sending Helmeppo into terrified screaming when he caught sight of him. Everyone else was looking at him with wide eyes. "If that's the case, allow me to show you just how great I think you are." He slipped into Zoro and appeared crouched on the chest of the statue, which was possible since it was at a 30 degrees angle off the floor. With his index finger extended, Luffy's arm lashed out. Shigen. Nothing happened for a few moments, but then the entire statue cracked before it blew up into thousands of pieces. As everyone gaped in horror, Luffy slipped into Zoro and appeared next to Helmeppo, who yelped as he was grabbed by Luffy by the scruff of his neck. "Now you are going to take me to where you put Zoro's swords," he said simply before he slipped into Zoro again and headed into building using the door that was located there at the rooftop. "Capture him. I'm gonna kill him," screamed Morgan in rage as he pointed at the door. "Yes, sir," shouted 3 officers before they grabbed their muskets and hurried into the building in direction of Helmeppo's room, since that was where Helmeppo had put Roronoa Zoro's swords and that was what the man that had destroyed Morgan's statue was after. "Captain, the criminal at the execution site is attempting to get free. He's halfway done." "What?" he bellowed, turning around and leaning over the edge of the rooftop to see that Zoro had someone freed his right arm and was now working on doing them same to his left. Was this a conspiracy between those 2 traitors? No matter, both of them are going to be executed personally by me. How dare they disobey and go against me? "000. Nami had sneaked into base quite easily around the time Luffy was talking to Zoro for the second time. She quickly hid away in one of the storage rooms after she saw that there were a few Marines moving around. She stayed there, kneeling behind a barrel in case a Marine suddenly entered so he wouldn't see her, and only had to wait a few minutes before the distraction started. She heard the sound of something made out of rocks breaking on the roof before there was a commotion. A few moments after that there the sound of a flintlock being shot, and then silence for another few moments before she almost literally felt all the Marines exiting the base. After she was sure that everyone had moved out, Nami quickly exited the storage room and began to make her way up towards the treasury, where she was sure were going to be the money and anything else of value she could take. Luffy does know how to make a distraction. Now, let's hope it lasts long enough for me to take everything there is that can get me closer to my goal, she told herself as she sped up, ignoring the ache from the training she had performed that morning and yesterday morning. Just wait, everyone. In no time I'll buy our village back from Arlong and he will be out our lives forever. 000. Luffy stepped out of Helmeppo's room holding Zoro's sword under his left arm and a dizzy Helmeppo with his right hand by the scruff of his neck. "I would leave you here, but Zoro's got unfinished business with you." "Trash," said Luffy with some of the disgust he was feeling towards Helmeppo to leak out of his voice. Don't move. Raise your hands above your head. Luffy turned towards the origin of the three voices saying the same thing, and he raised an eyebrow at the three Marines pointing their muskets at him. Really? I'm planning to do you guys a favor by getting rid of this guy and his father, and pointing your guns at me is how you pay me. Damn, how ungrateful can you be? The three Marines hesitated for a moment when they heard those words, but that was more than what someone like Luffy needed. Before they could realize it, Helmeppo had been thrown at them with enough strength to send them to the ground. Luffy then used Zoro and grabbed Helmeppo's body before it fell on top of the three Marines. Luffy saw a window at the end of the hall, and knowing that it faced the execution site, just like the one in Helmeppo's room, Luffy broke through it. He ignored Helmeppo's cries of pain as crystal shards dug into his flesh, and instead focused on what was happening with Zoro at the moment. He was holding his shoulder, where had been obviously shot at, as he leaned against the cross to which he had been tied to. Dozens of Marines were pointing their muskets at him while Morgan stood behind them watching and bellowing something, more than likely more bullshit about his supposed greatness. When Morgan pointed his axe hand at Zoro, Luffy knew he had less than a second to act. He used Jeppo to chance direction in midair, and while still in the enhanced state of Zoro, he used the speed to appear in front of Zoro just before the Marines pulled on the trigger. Tekai, he said simply as he put Helmeppo behind him. He was Zoro's to deal with as he pleased after all. The Marines fired their weapons, and under the shocked gazes of Zoro, Morgan, Helmeppo, and everyone else there, they simply bounced off his body after the sound of bullets hitting metal was heard. Some of the bullets even found their mark in one of the Marines that had shot, hitting them in different parts of their bodies, but not in a place that would result in instant death. Zoro, who had been thinking about his promise to Kuina and his dream of becoming the world's greatest swordsman, could only stare at this man who had randomly decided that he was going to become a part of his pirate crew. He had heard the conviction in his words and had heard about his ludicrous dream, one even more crazy and impossible than his own. And yet here he was, taking a volley of gunfire meant for him and somehow not being wounded by them. Who are you? Bellowed Morgan in rage as he saw this, completely ignoring the men that had fallen to the ground screaming in pain and the fact that the bloodied form of his son was being held by Luffy. My name is Monkey D. Luffy, and I am the man that will become the Pirate King, he declared simply before he turned towards Zoro and presented him with his swords. There you guy. The bastard had them in his room. It was a bitch to get him to tell me where they were since he couldn't handle the speed at which I was moving. What a weakling, said Luffy as Zoro stood up and took his swords from him. You know, after seeing you allied with me, they are going to see you as a pirate. Zoro snorted as he put his swords where they belonged, at his right side being held up by his haramaki. You did that on purpose, didn't you, you bastard? He asked him with a grin as he stood at his side, facing the Marines who were scurrying to reach for their swords after they saw that their bullets weren't going to work. Boy, I'm going to become the world's greatest swordsman. I don't care if I am an outlaw or not. I just want my name to be known as such worldwide. If you do something that ends up in the way of my goal, I'll cut your stomach open. Luffy grinned as he took a step back. The world's greatest swordsman, huh, he said, thinking about the monster that was the current holder of that title. A man so strong that he was on par with Shanks, who was a Yonko. And Zoro said he wanted to be stronger than that guy. Luffy grinned in approval. Good. As the first mate of the crew of the future Pirate King, I'm not going to hope for anything less. If you can't accomplish something like that, then I would be embarrassed as well. Zoro smirked. Well said, he said before he unsheathed his three swords in a smooth motion, holding one in each hand and one in his mouth. Then, allow me to take care of this rubbish, Captain, he said before he moved forward at speeds that surpassed by far of that of the Marines that were running towards them, their own swords in hand. Luffy watched with a grin as Zoro made quick work of them, his overall fighting ability being way beyond of that of the Marines. If Luffy had to make an accurate estimation, Zoro's abilities were enough for him to survive at the Grand Line and just beneath the level they needed to be to start learning the Rokushiki, which was extremely impressive for someone in the East Blue. Luffy also noticed that Zoro didn't kill even one of those Marines, only shallowly cutting them or rendering them unconscious by hitting them in the head with the flat of his swords, which spoke of his already high level of skill. Zoro dispatched the last of the Marines and he turned towards Luffy, a grin of his own on appearing after he pulled out the sword that was in his mouth. Were you impressed enough by your choice for a first mate, Captain? Luffy laughed. You bet I was, Zoro. You are truly strong. Now, allow me to show you just under what kind of strength you are going to be serving, he said before disappearing and appearing behind Zoro, who turned around just in time to see Luffy catching the axe blow from Morgan that was meant for him with his hand, the blade not even cutting into it. Zoro jumped back to give the two of them space and so he could see the fight better. The ground cracked under them, but Luffy's grin didn't even falter for a second as he held Morgan's axe without strain. Attacking your opponent from the back is cowardly and impolite. Allow me to educate you. You seem very attached to this axe of yours too. Luffy tightened his hold around Morgan's axe and the sound of metal groaning was heard before the head of the axe was broken in 100 pieces. Morgan backed away, now looking at the grinning Luffy in fear, before he shook his head and threw himself back towards Luffy, this time attempting to hit him with his left hand curled into a fist. I am Axe Hand Morgan. I am the greatest. Luffy scoffed. No, you are not, he said simply as he ducked under Morgan's strike, putting a hand on top of his straw hat to keep it in place since Morgan's attack generated wind strong enough to possibly kick it off his head. With the same motion, Luffy lashed with a kick towards Morgan's left knee, the result of which sent him down with a scream of pain. You are just a cruel fucker in a position of strength with delusions of grandeur. Shigen, he said as he stood in front of a kneeling Morgan. Before the lieutenant could as much as speak, Luffy's finger found itself buried in his forehead, killing him instantly. Morgan fell limply towards the ground face first, and Luffy leaned down to almost idly clean up his finger from blood and gray matter on his coat. He turned towards Zoro to see him stabbing Helmeppo through the chest with two of swords. Thought you were so smart by tricking me, huh? This what you get, you blonde shit, he said before he pulled out his swords from Helmeppo's body. Zoro watched dispassionately as he fell forward and stood eerily still. He had died the moment his swords had pierced his heart and lungs, so it had been quite merciful actually. Morgan's death had also been quick. It was way more than what the two of them deserved if what the two of them did to the inhabitants of Shell's Town was even remotely true, which they knew it was. Oi, Zoro, let's get something to eat. Since it's going to be your first real meal in 9 days, and to celebrate you joining my crew, it's going to be on me. The drinks too, he said with a grin as he began to walk towards the entrance of the base. His grin widened when he heard the Marines start to celebrate the death of Morgan, apparently not caring one way or another about the fate of Helmeppo. I already like you more than anyone I currently know, Captain, replied Zoro with a matching grin as he sheathed his swords and fell into step next to Luffy, the two of them laughing as they discussed what they were going to eat. One would look at them and not think that Zoro had just escaped custody and killed the son of the captain of this marine base, and that Luffy had just killed said captain. Zero. Man, that hit the spot, said Zoro as he patted his full belly before he began to drink from tankard full of bear. He, Luffy, and Nami were sitting inside the restaurant named Food Fu, which was owned by Rika's, the little girl that had gone to give Zoro the rice balls, Mother Ririka. When the news of Morgan's and Helmeppo's death had reached the inhabitants of Shell's Town, a town-wide party had begun in earnest. Ririka had somehow learned that Luffy and Zoro were responsible for that, and she had invited them to her restaurant to eat for free. Luffy and Zoro had of course accepted, knowing that you didn't refuse free food when offered since it was rude and dumb in equal level. You tell me, said Luffy with a satisfied sigh as he leaned back into his chair and putting his hand behind his head. He turned towards the other occupant of their table. Oi, Nami, aren't you going to eat more? It's free food after all. Nami just shook her head at him. I already ate enough. I'm not a gluttonous pig unlike you two. She sniffed at them with mock disdain before she gave Luffy a serious look. We really should be going, Luffy. I only left enough money there to make it seem as if they weren't robbed until they check for real. Also, I found something of interest in Morgan's secret safe, and it's going to take us about a week and a half to get there. We must make haste if we don't want to waste this chance. Luffy saw the seriousness in Nami's voice and nodded in agreement. All right then, Zoro, you heard our navigator. Let's go, he said before standing up. He grinned at Rika and her mother, who just smiled widely and gratefully at him in return. They did the same towards Zoro, the only difference being that Rika hugged him around his leg and thanked him when he waved at her, much to his embarrassment. That had everyone who saw the interaction laughing. As they stepped out of the bar, they encountered the Marines, who were not too injured to move. Nami stiffened almost imperceptibly at his side, but Luffy kept his head cool as he nodded at them. Good day, gents. We were just about to leave. There's no need for a confrontation. A Marine with a goatee stepped up. If you are going to leave, then that's good. We are grateful for you disposing of Morgan and his bastard son. But since we are Marines and you are pirates, we can't allow you stay here any longer. To show our appreciation, we won't tell HQ of your appearances when we report this incident. Before Nami could deny the fact that she was a pirate, Luffy nodded at them. It was of no issue. We will be out of your hairs in a few minutes. Nami, Zoro, let's go. We don't want to bother these fine gentlemen any longer. Nami and Zoro nodded before they followed after him. A few minutes later, the ship that Luffy and Nami stole from Alvida and had its appearance modified was sailing away from Shell's Town, with the group of Marines seeing them off and saluting. It was to this scene that Kobe finally arrived. He stood on the boat gaping as he saw Marines saluting whom they surely knew to be pirates. Weren't they also aware of the fact that they had been robbed by the people they were saluting? Needless to say, he was at a loss of words. The same man who had spoken to Luffy a few minutes ago peered down at him. And who might you be, young man? Kobe snapped into a salute. My name is Kobe, sir, and I would like to join the Marines, sir. The man nodded. You can join, but keep in mind that we have just saluted a group of pirates that helped us get rid of our previous captain and his son because of their cruelty. Without them, all of us in this town would have been dead before the next new moon. As such, we just established a punishment of a week without food. Are you still willing to join our ranks now? Kobe's eyes widened at that. What he was seeing was making sense. If that was the case, then I'm not going to tell them those same pirates robbed them of their money, since it seems they don't know about it. I'm going to let them find out on their own and feign ignorance, which is going to be easy since they don't know I knew Luffy and Nami were going to do it. As such, I deserve the punishment. Kobe nodded his head resolutely. Yes, sir. I would like to join now. Becoming a Marine has always been my dream. A week without food is nothing comparing to realizing my dream. The man nodded, smiling tightly. Good. Men, let's head back to our base. We have bodies to burn and a lot of thrash to throw out. All of them, including Kobe, who was still standing on the boat, saluted and responded, Yes, sir. 000. Back in the Marine cells, deep in the prison portion on the base, a hulking figure that was propped against the wall stirred. A few moments later, dark green eyes opened. Monkey D. Luffy, muttered the owner of those green eyes in a daze before they focused on her surroundings. Despite knowing that he was the man responsible of her being in this cell, she still blushed at the thought of him. Wait for me. I'm going to become strong and beautiful enough to be by your side. Alvida had awakened and she had a new purpose. All right, now I have definitely seen it all, muttered Zoro dryly as he stared as Luffy tied some rope around a freaking Sea King, whom he had explained to be the crew's pet, along with being the one in charge of keeping their course straight by towing the ship. He watched as the Sea King, who was apparently named Nina, purred as Luffy patted her head before telling her to submerge herself so she could do her job, after which he jumped back to the deck. His sweat dropped. For some reason, I feel like I shouldn't be surprised. And now that that's taken care of, trailed off Luffy as he walked towards Nami, who was making the last adjustment to their course while standing in front of the helm holding a map and a compass while muttering to herself. So, how much did you get from the Marine base, Nami? Around 5 million or so. I still need to count it to get an exact amount. It would have been much more if it weren't for the fact that they just paid you Alvida's bounty and the fact that the construction of Morgan's statue was bleeding them dry. She replied automatically with some annoyance as she was still focused on her task. She wanted to set their course as perfectly as she could in order to take the least amount of time to get to their destination. Is that so? So, you only need 10 million to reach your goal, right? When she nodded, again almost absently, Luffy grinned in delight as he patted her on the back. That's great. That means then that you won't have any more excuses to travel with me and you'll finally admit that you are my navigator. I'm not, nor ever will be, your navigator. Get it through your thick skull, you moron. She screamed at him after making the last adjustments to their course. She calmed down after sighing in defeat when Luffy just laughed at her. Ugh, never mind that. Anyways, we should be reaching the Orange Islands, where Orangetown is located, in about 10 days. That's where we need to go. You mentioned something about you finding something of interest when you were urging us to leave, said Zoro, joining them after he was finishing wrapping his head around what he had seen and also exploring the ship. He had to see if it was big enough for him to train comfortably, and he was pleased to say that it had more than enough space for him to do so. He had brought all of his training equipment with him, and the fact that he could use it straight away and whenever had him in a good mood. He also needed to ask Luffy about that technique he used to make bullets bounce off his skin. There was also that speed. Zoro knew that being able to do feats like that could be accomplished through training, and he wanted to learn anything that would help him cover the weaknesses that as a swordsman he would have. Like for example being unable to defend from and also reach long-range fighters. At Luffy's curious look, Nami began to explain. When I was looking for the treasury of the Marine base, I came across Morgan's secret safe, which I thought would contain more money. But it turns it was supposed to have the map on how to get to the Grand Line according to what was written inside. I was about to leave since you told me that you know how to get there. But instead of the map there was a sheet of paper with the mark of Buggy the Clown. Buggy the Clown, muttered Luffy as he thought about what Shanks had told him about his crewmate when he was part of the Roger Pirates when he was drunk and was willing to share stories of his past. From Shanks' own words, they had parted on neutral terms at best, but it was possible that Buggy still hated Shanks because of something Shanks did to him in the past. He used to belong to the Roger Pirates when he was a kid and is supposedly strong enough to head into the Grand Line, and I've also heard that he ate a devil fruit, meaning that he's got a power of some kind. He shouldn't be too much of a pushover, considering that he has a bounty of 15 million on his head. Not only that, but he's rumored to have a treasure worth of 10 million. Probably more now since I know for a fact that he's in Orangetown. I saw his ship when I was heading towards where Alvida was rumored to be sailing, and that's how I recognized his symbol. If he's still there, then he's been likely raiding the town for around 2 weeks now, more than enough time to drive the townspeople out and start looting the houses for anything valuable, said Nami with a grin, excited at the prospect of reaching her goal without even heading to the Grand Line. Normally she wouldn't even dare to mingle with someone of Buggy's caliber, but she had Luffy as her partner now, and knowing him, he was very likely to be interested in his bounty. It worked perfectly for the both of them. Zoro grinned in excitement at this, grasping the handle of Wado Ikamanji tightly. So, we are going to go there and challenge this funny pirate then? When Luffy nodded with a grin of his own, Zoro's grin widened. Excellent. I know about the code of pirates about captains fighting each other, but I'm sure there will be someone strong in his crew for me to fight. We'll find out about it when we get there. But in any case, you'll deal with his crew while I deal with Buggy himself. In the meantime, Nami will sneak into whenever they have their treasure and take as much as she can, since that's our deal, said Luffy, getting an agreeing nod from the other two. That means that in case anything goes wrong, which I doubt to be honest, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared, I'm going to up the intensity of your training, Nami. As she groaned, suddenly recalling that she was still sore, Zoro turned curious and interested gleaming eyes towards him. You are training her. In what? And 3 techniques out of a style of 6 that will help her survive because we are going to be heading to the Grand Line, said Luffy, ignoring her claim of her not needing to go anymore if Buggy turned out to have a treasure worth 10 million berries. She was his navigator after all, so she was going to the Grand Line with him. She was just still in denial. You actually saw 3 of them earlier, Zoro, which was how I moved so fast. Tekai, the one that I used to make the bullets unable to pierce my skin. And Shigen, the one I used to kill Morgan, and it allows me to pierce targets with my finger at speeds resembling that of a bullet. He said he was going to teach me Zoro. Jeppo, which makes you literally able to jump off the air, and Kami, which makes you able to bend your body and humanly allowing you to evade attacks coming from almost anywhere. He calls it training, but I'm sure he's just a sadist, said Nami, glaring at Luffy while ignoring how Zoro raised a skeptical eyebrow at being able to jump off the air. Why are you only going to teach me 3 of them if they are 6? And what's the 6th one? Answering your questions in reverse order. That would be Rankyaku, said Luffy, and instead of telling them, he opted to show them. He jumped in the air, using Jeppo as he had seen the skepticism on Zoro's face when Nami spoke of about being able to jump off the air, before he lashed out with a kick towards the ocean. A wall of water as high as the crow's nest of the ship as the ocean was split in half for a length of about 15 feet. Luffy grinned at the gaping look in Nami's face and Zoro's suddenly very interested expression. And I never said I was only going to teach you those 3 techniques. It's just that you first need to become proficient with Zoro and Jeppo before you can learn Rankyaku. And the toughness needed to be able to use Tekai and Shigen can only be acquired by grueling method of learning Kami. I would have taught them to you eventually, he said with a shrug. Teach me, said Zoro simply as he stared intensively at Luffy. Zoro, Jeppo and Tekai could be the answer to his weakness as a swordsman against long-range fighters. Rankyaku too, after he modified it to be able to use it with his swords instead of his feet, since as a swordsman, he didn't use those to attack. He could also devise a stabbing speed technique based off Shigen, but Zoro, Jeppo, Tekai, and Rankyaku were the ones he felt were more pressing for him at the moment. Kami didn't hold interest for him whatsoever, but he would train for it in order to be able to use Tekai and later on, Shigen, to see what he could devise based off the latter. Sure, said Luffy with a shrug and sharing Zoro's pleased and excited grin when the green-haired man, a fact that was revealed when he took off his bandana back at Food's Fu in Shell's Town, did as well. Though we should maybe wait until tomorrow. I know those injuries of yours are of no issue, but they can slow you down and you want to take advantage of every bit of training when trying to learn the Rokushiki. What do I do in the meantime then? Luffy shrugged his shoulders. Whatever you want, I guess. There's not much to do other than training thanks to Nami and Nina, he said before pointing at Nami, who was walking away while muttering to herself as she headed to the captain's cabin. She spends her time counting her money, studying navigation books and drawing maps. I like to eat, drink, take naps and gaze at the clouds. Zoro nodded in understanding before a thoughtful look appeared on his face. You've got booze. Luffy nodded. Dozens of barrels worth of it in the hold. Am I get pissed drunk then? Sure, just be sure to be ready for training early in the morning. Zoro waved him off uncaringly as he began to walk away. Sure, that won't be an issue, Captain. Luffy watching him descend to the hold with a chuckle and a shake of his head before he shrugged and went there himself to procure himself something to eat and drink so he could enjoy cloud watching as it was supposed to be enjoyed. That reminded him that he needed to get an actual cook for the crew soon. He could make a simple meal that was sufficiently nutritious himself. Makino and Daden made sure of that, but he was never going to enjoy a delicious one if he relied on himself. Not only a cook, but I also need someone to act as a master gunner. A carpenter is going to be essential when we finally make it to the Grand Line too. A doctor, surgeon is a no-brainer, and finally, a musician, for no voyage is complete without songs and merriment, thought Luffy, his grin weirding out Zoro slightly as he passed him with 2 bottles of rum held in his hand. The next day, with the sun not even fully out, found Luffy and Zoro facing each other in the main deck of the ship. Luffy was grinning while Zoro was looking at Luffy with a raised eyebrow, something he was starting to realize was going to be his default expression whenever his new captain was involved. "You want to spar with me with both of us using our swords?" He was glad that the saber Luffy held at his waist was not for show, but he didn't know about them facing each other in a swordsman duel. He had no illusion about the fact that Luffy was easily stronger and faster than him, but in a contest of swordsmanship only skill and experience with a blade mattered. On that he knew he was superior to Luffy at least. "Yeah," said Luffy as he unsheathed his blade and held it loosely at his side. "I am no swordsman, but I'm decent enough with a sword. Sparring against an actual swordsman can only help me get better with my technique, so this is mostly for my benefit. Though you can also use these spars to both get used to fighting someone faster and physically stronger than you and as warm-up for the actual training sessions." After a few moments, Zoro shrugged his shoulders and nodded in agreement before he tied his bandana around his head and pulled out his 3 swords and held them at the ready in his opening stance of the Santoryu he developed to be able to match Kuina in the past. This might be only a spar, but Zoro knew that he needed to give it his all and take it seriously if he wanted to keep up with Luffy. "Ready when you are, Captain." Luffy's answering wild grin was matched by Zoro's as they both jumped at each other. About an hour later, Nami woke up, and after checking that they were still on the course she had set, which they were thanks to Nina, whom she would never stop thinking as a godsend, she went down to the main deck only to stare blankly as she saw Luffy and Zoro, the former sweating a bit and the latter panting and practically bathed in his body's temperature regulation liquid, trying to apparently kill each other with their respective bladed weapons. If it weren't for the fact that she could clearly see the happy grins in their faces, she would have thought they were trying to kill each other after their egos clashed after disagreeing about something while she was sleeping. Luffy was the first to notice her. "Oh, hey there, Nami. Good morning," he said while ducking under one slash from the sword Zoro held in one hand while parrying the one that came from the other side with the sword that Zoro held in his left hand. He retaliated with a downward vertical slash that Zoro blocked by tilting his head, putting the edge of Wado Ikemanji in its path. "Did you sleep well? Boy, pay attention," shouted Zoro, not letting Nami respond to Luffy's question, his words not muffled despite the fact that he held a sword in his mouth. He had apparently gotten used to speak like that after many years of using Santoryu. He directed 2 diagonal slash strikes towards Luffy's midsection, only to scowl and groan in annoyance as Luffy easily evaded them by jumping back with a laugh. "Take me seriously, damn it. This is as serious as I can be if you want to be able to even see me move at your current level. Trust me, there are only a handful of people here in East Blue that would be able to handle even this much from me. The fact that you are keeping up and demanding even more speaks very well of you, Zoro," said Luffy with sincerity, grinning when he saw Zoro looking away in embarrassed disdain. "In any case, now that Nami is finally here, we can finally start training for real." At that, Nami could only groan as she began to drag herself towards them. She wasn't as sore as she was, but with Luffy's promise of intensifying what was already an insane regimen, she could only dread what was coming. Zoro saw this, and he also approached Luffy, wondering why Nami was acting as if she was willingly walking towards her death after Luffy mentioned that they were going to start training for real. How bad could it be? He thought to himself. When he saw Luffy's absolutely evil and sadistic smirk, however, he had to pause as he shuddered from head to toe. "Oh, shit. I just jinxed it, didn't I? Fuck me. Well, no pain, no gain, as they say. A000. The following 9 days were hell on earth for Nami and an eye-opening experience for Zoro, because of the increased intensity of the Tortu training. Nami went to bed each day feeling like she was going to die before she even had a chance to count her money and draw maps, leaving her only able to study her navigations book and eat something before exhaustion sent her to sleep, only to repeat the same thing the next day. Thankfully, yesterday had been different for some reason, and even thought she still felt the pain, she could move with just a little difficulty. When asked about it, Luffy only replied that she was progressing and that her body had gotten used to the intensity of the training. Nami was just glad she could walk around normally. Now if only the pain would go away. In Zoro's case, it was the complete opposite. He had trained hard for his entire life, anyone could see that, but he had never done the kind of specialized training that required making you capable of learning how to use the Rokushiki. Thousands of continuous squats while weighted down and attempting to dodge pebbles moving with almost the speed of a bullet while also weighted down. It was crazy and insane, and he loved it. Add in his normal upper body training, sword training, and his spars with Luffy, Zoro could literally feel how he was getting stronger every day. The fact that Luffy had commented that he had to up the rhythm of their spar a bit noticeably only 3 days after they begun training only served as proof as to what Zoro was feeling. And he also got to get drunk every night, and no one said nothing about it was the icing on the cake. This served to keep both Nami and Zoro sufficiently occupied, but even that wasn't enough for them to notice that other than his spars with Zoro and a few random exercises that anyone could do, Luffy didn't seem to train, opting to spend his time gazing at the clouds, napping, eating and drinking while they worked their asses off. The only reason they didn't call him out on it was because he was obviously many times stronger than them, even more so in Nami's case than Zoro's, but they still wondered. What they didn't know was that Luffy trained during the night, using special weights provided by his grandfather that would increase their own weight after analyzing the bearer's current strength. It was the reason why he spent the days taking naps, but they were not going to find about that until later. Currently, the three of them were lazing around the deck. Zoro was leaning against the foremast while meditating. Nami was just enjoying the salty wind of the ocean against her face while standing against the railing of the forecastle deck, and Luffy was cloud-gazing while lazily rocking his hammock from side to side. Today was the day they were supposed to reach Orangetown, and they have just finished their training session, which had not been as intense for obvious reasons, and were just waiting for the island to appear over the horizon. Nami perked up when she saw a boat with 3 men. She could see that the boat had the Buggy pirates Jolly Roger in its single sail, and they were headed directly towards them. With a grin, she turned her head back. "Hey, you two. Good news. Buggy is still here. Come and take a look." Luffy and Zoro walked towards where she was and shared her grin when they saw what had caught her attention. "Excellent," said Luffy simply. He wasn't precisely looking forward to fighting Buggy since he knew that with his bounty, he wasn't going to be a good challenge, but said bounty was of an amount that could prove to be useful later on. He still needed to make a name for himself, and defeating the big names here in East Blue was a sure way to go around accomplishing that. "What are we going to do about them? I can see the smug and greedy grins on their faces from here," said Zoro in a bored tone, as he could also see that the 3 men on the small boat weren't even worth unsheathing his swords to deal with them. "We'll ignore them. Let Nina take care of them." Nami turned towards him with wide eyes. "What do you mean by?" She trailed off as she saw Nina rise from the depths. She was swimming and right next to the boat just when it was about 100 meters away from them. Even though Nina was roaring at them, Nami could hear their screams of horror, which were abruptly cut off when Nina lunged towards them and snatched them up in a single bite without even harming the boat. Never mind," she stammered weakly. She supposed that giving them a quick death by becoming the meal of a sea king was better than dying from the beatdown Luffy and Zoro were surely going to unleash on them for daring to attack their ship. Zoro blinked before shrugging. That's one way to take care of them," he said, ignoring how disturbed he felt at Luffy's adoring and encouraging words towards Nina, who actually blushed and ducked her head in pleased embarrassment before purring and submerging back. "I'm never going to get used to that." "Oh, Zoro, you poor fool. You don't even know half of it." A few minutes later they passed by the boat, and Nami perked up when she saw the chest that was on it. "Let's get that," she exclaimed. Luffy saw what she was talking about, and with a quick application of Zoro he brought it to their ship. Nami laughed happily when she saw that it was full of berry coins and expensive-looking jewelry. She turned towards Luffy with hopeful eyes. "Can I keep it?" Luffy laughed. "I can't say no to a cute expression like that, now can I?" "Thank you," she squealed in delight before she went to put it with her things after she gave Luffy a hug that he enjoyed very much for the few seconds it lasted. "Don't tell me she's got you wrapped around her little finger, Captain," teased Zoro with an infuriating smirk. "Nah," denied Luffy easily with a chuckle. "My navigator likes money, and there's no reason for me to deny her if she wants it from those I know for sure won't need it. Besides, the happier she is, the faster she'll stop being denial about her role within my crew." Zoro just shook his head at him. About an hour later they were within sight of Orangetown. Luffy could make out the vague outline of a bright purple-colored ship that resembled a circus tent, which he quickly deduced was Buggy. He was about to tell Nina and Nami to change the course, so they could use the same tactic he used against Alvida when they heard the sound of a cannon being fired. Nami and Zoro ducked as an absolutely big explosion went off above them. Luffy had caught sight of the red cannonball that was the cause of the explosion, and his only reaction was to narrow his eyes as he looked up at the slowly dispersing smoke from the explosion, ignoring the splash of the burnt body of a bird twice his size falling to the ocean next to their ship. That was strong enough to easily destroy the ship. An explosion like that I can shrug off, but Zoro and Nami are not on that level yet. "I can't let them hit us," thought Luffy. "What the hell was that?" shouted Nami in panic as she rose back to her feet while widely looking towards the purple ship. "I think we were spotted, and that was the welcoming present," said Zoro calmly as he also stood up, crossing his arms as he narrowed his eyes towards the ship. Before anything else could be said, the sound of a cannon being fired was heard again, and Luffy noticed that the explosive cannonball was going to hit them directly. Knowing that he couldn't let it even get too close, Luffy quickly used Zoro and Jeppo to quickly jump into the air, and he twirled around as he lashed out with a kick so fast that not even Zoro caught the movement. Rankyaku. The incoming red cannonball was split in half by seemingly nothing, and it exploded prematurely about a mile away from where they were. Luffy ignored the gaping looks and turned towards them with a serious expression. Let's use the smoke of the explosion to cover our change of direction so we can approach them on foot. Those cannonballs make it too dangerous to face them like this, and I am sure they can fire more of those at the same time, and I'm not sure I'll be able to deflect all of them. They are going to be busy dealing with their own issues right about now. 000. Buggy was having a great time that day. His men were almost done looting the town, which meant that soon they would be able to go raid the other towns located in the Orange Islands in order to get enough treasure to comfortably head into the Grand Line so he could conquer it. He knew that with the power granted by his Bara no Mai and his explosive cannonballs designed by himself, the Buggy balls, he was going to be able to pull it off. Just you wait, Shanks, you flashy bastard. Your days are numbered. You think you can almost cost me my ambition and then go and become a major player in the Grand Line while I rotted away here in the weakest of all seas and not expect me to do something about it? Think again. He thought as he sat on his throne that he had set on the docks that he had taken for himself after arriving at Orangetown. The big top, his precious ship, looked imposing behind him. Captain Buggy, sir, there is an incoming ship with blank sails and flag. What should we do? Buggy turned towards the member of his crew that told him that and laughed. Joy ho ho ho. This is the opportunity we have been waiting for. I was going to use the Buggy balls on the town after we finished raiding it to test them, but we have a more viable target now. You know what to do, he said, his voice having a high-pitched tone that curiously enough matched his appearance, which resembled that of a clown's. His crew hurried to prepare the cannon, and not a minute later the first shot was sent towards the ship. Buggy was somewhat annoyed because they had missed and had instead hit a bird that was flying a few hundred feet above the incoming ship, but he was pleased to see the size of the explosion, knowing that it was powerful enough to easily destroy the incoming ship. Before the smoke from the explosion could even start dispersing, he ordered for a second shot to be fired. He knew that it was possible that this ship carried something worth stealing, but at the moment he was interested in seeing for himself the effectiveness of his Buggy balls. The expectant grin on his face quickly disappeared when he saw his Buggy ball exploding prematurely after being somehow split in half. Then he screamed in shock, his mouth and eyes going comically wide when he saw the main mast of his ship also being cut in half along with part of the upper portion of the foremast and the mizzenmast. He stared in horrified shock as they fell to the deck, heavily injuring or outright killing a few of his crewmates who had not been able to move away in time. What the fuck? Was that Eric the Whirlwind? He thought furiously, knowing that the mercenary was the only one in East Blue capable of creating wind blades that were strong enough to slash through rocks, meaning that the wood of which his ship was made was nothing to him. He didn't know that he could make them big and powerful enough to reach them from over a kilometer away. While his crew panicked and Moji and Kabaji were trying to calm them down so they could deal with the situation, Buggy grit his teeth as he glared at the cloud of smoke that was obscuring his view from the ship that housed the one that had just ruined his ship and likely set back his plans for weeks. I'm going to flashily fucking kill that flashy fuck. He's no match for me and my Bara no Mai. He was after all immune to slashing attacks, which he knew were the bread and butter of Eric the Whirlwind. Everyone able to fight go into the town and intercept that bastard. Moji, take Richie and go with them. Kabaji, stay with me, shouted Buggy, his anger getting the better of him and making him take an impulsive and quite stupid decision. What's worse, he was actually the smarter member of his crew, and in their own anger, they just roared their agreement as they clamored for revenge. Even Kabaji, who was usually the level-headed one and the voice of reason, was angry enough that he agreed with his captain's decision, unluckily for Buggy and his crew, who couldn't be more wrong about the identity of the assailant. 000. After their ship arrived at another set of docks that were located at another part of the town that was also facing the ocean, confirming in the process that either the inhabitants of the town were either killed or forced to flee away since there was no one to be seen. Luffy, Nami, and Zoro quickly anchored the ship and tied it to the docks. Luffy then told Nina to go and approach Buggy's ship and not reveal herself until he called for her. He was feeling a bit vindictive after Buggy attempted to destroy their ship, and he had a plan to go around getting revenge for that. Let's go. We don't have long until they get their wits about them after I cut down the masts of their ship. We must hit them while they are still busy dealing with that, said Luffy, expecting for Buggy to make the sensible decision of waiting for them after witnessing an attack as powerful as that one. Common sense dictated that playing on the defensive along with superiority in numbers gave the advantage. It wasn't like the outcome would change if Buggy did that, but it was what Luffy would have done in a similar situation. As a pirate that apprenticed along Shanks with the Roger Pirates, he expected at least that much from him. Nami and Zoro nodded, also thinking the same as Luffy, and they quickly began to make their way in the direction where the docks in which Buggy's ship was anchored at. Nami was surprised at the speed at which she was moving and the fact that she could keep up with Luffy and Zoro, whom she knew for a fact were way faster and stronger than her. Eventually, she deduced that they were holding back a lot in order to let her keep up with them, Luffy easily more so than Zoro. What she didn't know, however, was that the green-haired man was surprised that he didn't have to do so more than what he was doing. Luffy wasn't that surprised since he had been training her for the past 11 days. The trio reached a town square, which curiously enough had a small white dog standing protectively in front of a store that by its name apparently sell food for pet. When they were forced to stop and stare when a group of more than 20 pirates that looked more like a circus act appeared from the other end of it, they were being led by a man with a hairstyle that made him resemble a teddy bear. A half shirt made of fur, blue pants and a sash tied around his waist. He was sitting on top of a great lion that was taller than Luffy at the shoulders that had golden brown colored fur, and its mane was of a curiously royal purple color. Luffy took one look at the lion and how strong and intimidating it looked before pointing at it with a blank expression on his face. "I want it," he said simply. "Don't you have enough with Nina as a pet?" asked Zoro incredulously as he unsheathed his 2 unnamed swords. This lot wasn't even worth him using all 3 of his swords, much less Wado Ikamanchi. And after the intense 9 days of training and sparring with Luffy, taking them seriously was simply out of the question. "One does never have enough intimidating creatures on their side that can fight and wreak havoc," said Luffy wisely as he popped his knuckles with a wide grin on his face. "All right, I'll take the lion, so I can take it away from that teddy bear guy since he looks to be its master. Zoro, he looks the strongest out of all of them, so you take him on. Nami, it's time you see how much you have grown since I started training you. The fodder is for you to deal with." While Zoro just nodded in agreement, Nami turned towards Luffy with a wide-eyed look of scandalization. "Me? Fight him? No way." Sure, she has been training a lot and she had seen that she had grown faster noticeably and she was feeling excited at literally feeling her chances of survival increasing. But going from that to willingly fight a group of more than 20 pirates that were a foot taller than her and 3 times her body mass was a totally different story. "If you don't get used to what you are capable of, then me training you would have been for nothing," said Luffy after giving her serious look before he smiled reassuringly at her. "Trust me, you'll be fine. You are way stronger than what you think you are." Nami found herself flushing a bit under his earnest look before she huffed and looked away in annoyance. "Fine, but I'm running away back to the ship if I as much get a scratch. And I'll be expecting you to bring me Buggy's treasure along with giving me his bounty when you cash it in." Chuckling, Luffy did not comment on the fact that Nami obviously trusted him enough to believe that him defeating Buggy was already a given thing and simply nodded at her. "Deal." Moji, having enough of waiting and not hearing what they were saying, pointed dramatically at them and began to shout. "My name is Moji the Beast Tamer. I am the first mate of the Buggy Pirates. We are here on Captain Buggy's order to take revenge on what you did to our ship. Attack my comrades," he said pompously, the pirates roaring in approval as they charged towards the trio while he held back. Nami saw this and knew that she was up first. "I'm so going to regret this," she said before she sighed and pulled out her bow staff, took a few steps forwards and waited at the ready. She immediately noticed how slow they were moving and her eyes widened in realization. "Luffy's pebbles move way faster than this when he throws them at us and I can see them coming at me. These guys are nothing compared to that," she thought with an excited grin that scared the incoming pirates before she lashed out with her staff when they were close enough, sending one of them to unconsciousness after she caught him right in the temple. Moji and Richie gaped in disbelief when they saw this small, in comparison, orange-haired girl start smacking around his crewmates with a grin on her face. She was almost dancing around them, easily evading their attacks and lunges while striking back using that long staff of hers along with mixing it in with a few kicks that held more than enough strength to also knock out and cause enough damage to have the pirates screaming pain. They were not rendered unconscious immediately. Zoro raised an eyebrow at Luffy, who was not surprised but visibly pleased. "Are you sure she wasn't this strong before you started to train her? There's no way she's gotten like this after just 11 days of training." "No matter how intense and hellish," said Zoro, wincing in sympathy when Nami caught a pirate in between the legs with a rising vertical strike with her staff, making that pirate give a high-pitched squeal of anguish before he passed out and fall to the side, twitching erratically while grabbing his crotch. "She was strong enough to take on 2 or 3 of guys like those before I started training her, and she was already very skilled using that staff of hers. She's got lots of potential to become truly strong, and with the kind of training I'm putting her through, she's just starting to realize it. I'm excited to see what she will be capable of doing once she reaches the level necessary to use the Rokushiki and starts to branch out on her own," said Luffy with a grin as Nami knocked out the final pirate with thrust of her staff that caught said pirate right in the nose, breaking it in the process. Nami, just breathing a bit heavily, had a grin on her face as she looked around at the defeated pirates she had defeated almost effortlessly. This was enough for proof for her to realize that Luffy wasn't just simply leading her on so he could betray her later, which subconsciously she was still thinking. She knew that before Luffy's training doing something like this would have been impossible for her. The fact that she could do it, and that Luffy knew that she could do it, spoke volumes to her and shed some light to Luffy's perception of her. Both Moji and Richie soon got over their shock, and with snarls on their faces, Richie's significantly more menacing and intimidating than Moji's, lunged towards Nami, ready to tear her to tiny chunks of flesh. Said orange-haired girl could only yelp in shock as she raised her staff protectively in front of her body, not being fast enough to move out of the way in time. Thankfully for her, Luffy and Zoro were more than ready to interfere in case something like this happened. "Hey, that's not nice," said Luffy chidingly as he appeared in front and slightly to the side of Nami and stopping Richie from advancing by grabbing it by its mane, making it whimper in a bit of surprised discomfort as this action resulted in him pulling the hairs of its mane. Before Moji could get in a word otherwise, Luffy reached towards him, grabbed him by his fur shirt and hurled him back towards where Zoro was. "No, Richie," shouted Moji, but he was forced to jump back to evade an attack from Zoro, but he was only mildly successful as a deep gash appeared on his right forearm while another less profound one appeared on his midsection. Moji grunted in pain and he turned towards Zoro with a glare as he pulled out his whip. "I'm going to kill you," he declared before he sent the end of his whip towards Zoro, who easily ducked under it. "Yeah, good luck with that, weirdo," replied Zoro blandly. Back with Luffy, he had forced the giant lion away from Nami, much to her relief as she settled down to get her energy back and also watch what was going to happen. And now he was grasping its neck while pinning it to the ground where it was struggling to get free to no avail. "So, your name is Richie, huh? You seem stronger than that guy who is fighting my friend. Why do you follow him?" he asked, genuinely curious about it. At the question, Richie got a glazed over look before it shook its head and began to trash about again. It even attempted to bite Luffy, but much to the surprise of both of them, Richie managed to sink its fangs in but not pierce Luffy's skin. "Holy crap, that bite of yours is something else. I'm definitely taking you with me," said Luffy with a grin before he got a focused look on his face as he locked eyes with Richie. Luffy brought forth his focused Heishoku haki and directed it exclusively at Richie. He could only do it for a few moments, longer than that and he would unleash it upon the entire town, so he hoped it would be enough to make Richie submit. Richie's eyes widened as it felt something inside of it snap, but instead of getting angry and starting thrashing around, it turned towards Luffy with quite the grateful look in its eyes before it passed out. Luffy also felt that, and he managed to follow that link of sorts towards Moji, and judging by what he had seen and felt, it had been established against Richie's will. Luffy released his hold on the lion's neck and smiled down at it before patting its chest and turning around to watch how Zoro was dealing with Moji. Moji's eyes widened and he faltered when he felt his link with Richie breaking. "No, what have you done?" he shouted towards Luffy, turning away from Zoro, feeling confident of the fact that he had him handled considering that his whip was wrapped around his arm. The link he had forced on Richie was a hypnotic one that forced Rich to see him as something akin as an older brother. He had almost died when he had approached the minion lion, a rare breed that could only be found in some key islands on the East Blue, and now all of that was shot to the proverbial drain. "Don't insult me by taking your eyes off me," shouted Zoro before with a grunt he used the hold Moji had on him with his whip to pull him towards him. Moji only had time to turn his head and widen his eyes before he found himself impaled straight through the chest. Moji coughed up blood as he tried to raise his head weakly, but Zoro kicked him off his sword and he died just before his body hit the ground. "TCH, he could use that whip of his decently enough, but he was still a weakling," muttered Zoro as he cleaned his bloodied sword on Moji's fur shirt before sheathing them. Before Nami and Zoro could approach Luffy and ask him just how he had managed to knock out the gigantic lion without hitting it, they heard a gasp coming from the end of the town square they had come from, and they turned towards it only to see a somewhat elderly-looking man with gray hair that has been arranged in 3 lumps, 2 on the sides and the front. He wore a yellow-lined shirt with dark green pants and a brown armor chest plate with gauntlets. You defeated those damned pirates like it was nothing. They forced us out of our homes about 20 days ago. Please, help us. I'm willing to pay you." The 3 of them exchanged looks before Luffy and Zoro shrugged while Nami slowly approached the old man while wriggling and rubbing her hands greedily as she smiled sweetly. "Oh, you are willing to pay us. How much are we talking about here?" It was in that moment that Boodle realized that he just might have changed one evil for another. "0. I think we might have made a mistake, Buggy, sir," said Kabaji with some hesitation as he stood next to Buggy, who was sitting in his throne once again, as they stared in the town's direction. It had been long enough that Moji, Richie and the others should have been back, either with the beaten body of the one that destroyed the masts of their ship or because they escaped after they realized they stood no chance against this foe. "You don't have to tell me that, Kabaji," shouted Buggy in his high-pitched voice as a vein throbbed on his forehead. After the initial burst of anger had left him, Buggy had quickly worked out that whomever had done it, it couldn't possible had been the mercenary Eric the Whirlwind, simply because this was not where he was known to work, which was between Reverse Mountain, Logtown and the Konomi Islands. It was possible he had come to take his bounty, but that was not the man's style. And he also worked out that the mercenary wasn't strong enough to pull something like that off, which meant that this was someone even stronger, which shocked Buggy since this was East Blue, the weakest of all seas. That meant that whoever was coming for him could possibly have a method to negate the immunity he had to slashing-type attacks. It was because of that reason that Buggy took another decision. This one a bit more sensible considering the situation. Kabaji, I want you to flashily shoot as many Buggy balls as possible into the town. But, Captain Buggy, shouted the feminine sword user and acrobat as he looked on appalled. That would be sentencing Moji, Richie and the others to death. They might as well already be dead for all we know. I can't let whoever this is to come after us, kill us too and take my treasure for themselves. I'd rather die than let that happen, shouted Buggy back with an angry expression on his face. It wasn't like he didn't care about his crew, but Buggy was a realist with pessimistic tendencies, which resulted in him more often than not expecting the worst that could happen. In this case, he wasn't that far off from the truth since Moji was indeed dead, but the others were still alive and in quite a bit of pain except for Richie, who was just momentarily unconscious. Kabaji hesitated for a moment but nodded after he also realized there was nothing else they could do. It will be done, Captain Buggy, he said, bowed and went to carry out his captain's orders, as much as he felt like he was betraying his crewmates. Still, his captain had a valid point, and it was best to play it safe rather than hope for the best when it was obvious that their enemy was strong enough to counter the Buggy balls and destroy the masts of their ships. Zero. Shanks would definitely not be happy with Buggy if he learned what he had been doing here, muttered Luffy after his awe at Chowchu, the white dog that even after all this years was still guarding his owner's shop out of loyalty for him. Diminished enough for him to hear the end of Boodle's tale about how Buggy and his crew had come one day out of basically nowhere and forced them to flee to outskirts of the city lest they get killed. What was that? Asked Zoro after hearing Luffy mutter under his breath. Nothing, said Luffy, waving him off as he went toward the unconscious Richie. He was not about to leave him in the middle of the town square after all. We are going to take down Buggy and the rest of his crew, Major Boodle, for the right price of course, said Nami greedily. She decided that she was going to keep to herself the fact that they were going to do that anyways, and when Zoro opened his mouth to say exactly that, she glared at him, prompting him to close it with an audible click. Boodle sighed in relief. Thank you so much. We are a modest town and there's not a lot we can offer, but we can come to an agreement afterwards. I promise you on my honor as the major of this town that we are going to repay you however we can, he said truthfully, bowing deep at the waist. Luffy, who had picked up Rich effortlessly and had put him next to Chowchu, who was now giving the unconscious Minion Lion a wary look, was about to assure Boodle that there was no need to pay them, since they had been about to do that anyways and Buggy's bounty and treasure were more than enough for them, when suddenly they heard the shot of a cannon being fired and then the ground shaking as an enormous explosion occurred a few hundred meters away and setting a decent portion of the town on fire, black smoke rising into the air. That was definitely Buggy using those explosive cannonballs of his, said Zoro blandly as he stared up at the crown of the fire that could be seen from where they were. Is he insane? Shouted Nami as she rose back to her feet from where she had thrown herself to the floor. Not only is he attempting to destroy the town, but is also going to kill his crewmates. Luffy had his eyes narrowed as he looked in the direction he knew Buggy was. You can't really fault him. By this point he should know that those he sent to intercept us have been defeated and possibly killed if they haven't returned. He's cornered and he knows that. And cornered animals tend to lash out as a last desperate attempt to survive. Boodle, who had thrown himself to the ground due to the explosion, shot to his feet with a snarl on his face. That scum, not only he forces out of our homes to take away our hard-earned and precious things, but he is also attempting to destroy our town. I'm going to kill him myself, he shouted, reaching for his spear and starting to charge towards where Buggy was. He didn't take 2 steps before Luffy calmly chopped him the back of his neck and caught him before setting him next to Chowchu, who was now growling at him. Why would you that? Asked Nami in shock. He would have gotten himself killed if he had gone there. This way, the worst he is going to suffer is a mild headache for a few hours, said Luffy before another explosion was heard as another portion of the town was destroyed. Luffy frowned as he looked down at Chowchu, who had calmed down after hearing Luffy's explanation as to why he had knocked out the friend of Master Hawker and who also brought him food every day. Can you look after these two while we deal with Buggy and whomever is left? I know I can count on you, Chowchu. Chowchu just nodded at him, taking a few steps forward, so he now also stood in front of the unconscious forms of Boodle and Richie. Good boy, said Luffy with a smile before he turned serious again and looked at both Zoro and Nami. Let's go, he said simply before the three of them began to make their way towards where Buggy was. It only took them a few seconds since they were moving faster than before, Nami being capable of keeping up with them since she was pushing herself to see just what her current limits were. When they arrived, it was to see Buggy's mastless ship anchored next to a dock that was wide enough to erect a circus tent on top of it. Luffy momentarily ignored the gaping look the clown-resembling fellow, obviously Buggy was giving him as he noticed an effeminate man was hurrying to put a red cannonball that was bigger than normal and had painted on its surface Buggy's symbol in the all directions adjustable cannon that was part of the figurehead of the ship, which resembled an elephant, with the cannon serving as the elephant's trunk. He also noticed that for some reason, the circus tent was filled to the brim with barrels full of golden coins and precious things, meaning that Buggy's treasure was there instead of inside the ship. Luffy didn't know what possessed Buggy to do this, arrogance and desire to show off perhaps, but he was glad because it made it easier for him to implement his plan. Nina, who the fuck? Buggy began to shout only for it fall short inside his throat and he almost choked on his own air and saliva as a gigantic sea king with brown scales rose from the water next his ship and it only stopped rising until it stood noticeably taller than the previous height of the Big Top's main mast. Nina glared down at Kabachi and the injured members of Buggy's crew that were still conscious as they gaped up at her in terror before she roared and lunged. Instead of attempting to eat them, however, she coiled her body twice around Buggy's ship, her body being long enough that she managed to do that and a significant portion of it was still inside the water. Kabachi only had time to drop the buggy ball he was carrying, which didn't explode since it needed the gunpowder off the cannon for the explosive reaction to begin, and jump off the ship before Nina constricted her body around the ship, cracked it until it was deformed and dragged it to the depths of the ocean along with the rest of Buggy's crew. Buggy ignored the fact that Kabachi had been able to save himself as he stared at the churning waters in which his ship used to be. The only thing remaining were a few chunks of purple wood floating around. "My ship," he whimpered before he snarled and turned to the one responsible, the man wearing an eerily familiar straw hat, and pointed angrily at him before screeching in his high-pitched voice, spittle flying out of his mouth. "You flashy fucking bastard. Who the hell do you think you are? You have any idea of what you have done?" Luffy just shrugged his shoulders uncaringly, as if he hadn't just somehow gotten a Sea King to sink a ship of considerable size like it was nothing. "My name is Monkey D. Luffy. I am the man that's going to become the Pirate King. Your bounty and your treasure are going to help me get started on that." "Buggy," said Luffy simply as he prepared himself. He didn't know what kind of devil fruit Buggy ate, but if you knew that one of your opponents had the power of one, you always prepared for the worst in case it was something powerful or troublesome. He doubted it. But when Monkey D. Garp beats something into you, it was difficult not to do it on instinct, read out of fear of punishment via fist of love. Buggy gritted his teeth in anger as he pulled out his knives, which he held between his fingers, as he pointed them threateningly at Luffy. "If you think I'm going to let you take away my treasure, you have another damn thing coming. I'll flashily kill you and then I'll take your ship and your treasure and add it to mine. The one that's going to become the king of pirates is me." "For some reason, I doubt that," said Luffy dryly before he lashed out with a roundhouse kick to the air faster than what Buggy could see, much less react. Rankyaku. In the blink of an eye, Buggy was split in half horizontally at the waist. Luffy, however, noticed something strange right away. "Joy ha ha ha. I'm immune to cutting attacks, you fool," pretty much confirmed Buggy as he split the rest of his body in various pieces that were floating around in the air. But his feet were firmly rooted to the ground, however. His head turned towards Kabachi as he noticed that while Luffy had not reacted other than with a raised eyebrow, his two companions were gaping at him in disbelief. "Kabachi, kill the green-haired one and the orange-haired harlot. Leave the straw hat-wearing fucktard to me." Kabachi pulled out his unicycle, mounted it and unsheathed his sword. "As you command, Captain Buggy." "Did some of the stuff that was supposed to go to your cranium to act as a brain went instead to your big and ugly red nose, Buggy? You don't tell your opponent how your power works while you are fighting them," chided Luffy, grinning as Zoro unsheathed his swords and put Wado Ikamanji in his mouth after he realized that Kabachi was a proper swordsman despite the fact that he was mounted on a unicycle and blocked his charge easily. He turned towards Nami. "His treasure is inside the tent. Go do your thing. We will deal with these two." Nami, at the mention of acquiring more money, quickly shook off the shock seeing a man literally splitting himself, staying alive and even somehow talking without his head attacked to his neck, where the vocal cords were located, and nodded at him. She used her newfound running speed to quickly make her way towards the tent, which she could see for herself was filled to the brim with valuable objects and, more importantly, money. Buggy saw this and snarled towards her. "I'm not going to let you get my treasure." Bara Bara Hokiri Hinashi, one of Buggy's hand, along with some of his forearm, shot towards Nami at speeds that were far faster than what Nami could react to as she turned towards the incoming attack with wide eyes as she kept running, unable to do anything to stop the knives Buggy was holding in between his fingers from skewering her. However, when Buggy's attack was almost a yard away from hitting Nami, a gunshot rung out followed by Buggy's scream of agony as his fingers were forced to release their hold on the knives since they couldn't close anymore because of a bullet piercing right through Buggy's wrist and damaging the nerves there. seeing Buggy's hand hanging limply as it crashed to the ground next to her. Nami sighed in relief as she continued to run towards the tent while Buggy, crying in pain, turned towards Luffy to see him slowly turning his smoking pistol towards him with a grin on his face. You said that you were immune to cutting attacks. Let's see how you'll fare against the piercing damage done by bullets and blunt force trauma, he said as he raised his fist until it was next to his face. Luffy pulled the trigger of his pistol while aiming for Buggy's other arm as he jumped towards where the rest of Buggy's body parts were floating around. It was at that moment that Buggy knew, as he yelped while trying to evade being shot at or hit by Luffy's punches, unable to do anything else unless he wanted to get shot again, that this wasn't going to end pretty for him. Back with Zoro, the green-haired swordsman had an annoyed look on his face as he blocked all of Kabaji's sword strikes with relative ease. The effeminate man knew how to correctly swing a sword and where to aim his strikes at least, and that unicycle of him gave him quite the unpredictable mobility. However, other than that, this man's fighting ability was average at best. He would have had a few issues fighting him if it had been before spending 9 straight days sparring and training with Luffy. But now, to him this man was nothing more than a joke. He didn't even need to get serious on the first place. HMPH, it seems like you can actually use those 3 swords of yours, Roronoa Zoro. I should get serious too then. Behold, Kyokyugi, Kaji Oyaji, he shouted before he breathed a ball of fire that was the same height as Zoro and 3 times as wide. Zoro's left eyebrow twitched. Boy, aren't you a swordsman? What's up with those parlor tricks, huh? He shouted before he used the sword on his left hand to cut the fireball in 2 right in the middle, letting the 2 halves pass by him without doing much as he could ignore the heat easily. Zoro glared at Kabaji as he pointed at him with that same sword. I'm going to cut you down in an instant if you don't take this seriously. I'm taking it seriously, you asshole. Kyokyugi, Kamikaze Hyakoma Gikijo, Kabaji shouted before he pulled hundreds of spinning tops from somewhere and began to hurl them at Zoro at decent speeds. The green-haired swordsman, who had been attempting to job Luffy's bullet like pebbles for the last 9 days, saw them moving in slow motion. Heck, even before joining Luffy he would have been able to easily deal with this. With a click of his tongue, Zoro began to effortlessly cut the tops in half, not even needing to use Wado Ikemonji which he was holding his mouth. Truthfully, using Santoryu with this guy was overkill, even without being serious about it. Kabaji stopped hurling tops at Zoro the moment he realized they were being countered easily. I'm not done yet. Kyokyugi, Norio Ukage Hanabi. Zoro watched with blank expression as Kabaji somehow went up a wall with his unicycle, somersaulting in the air after he reached the edge and positioning himself in such a way that now he was right above Zoro with his sword posed to stab him from above. Ikarin Zashi, he shouted as he began to rapidly descend. Zoro's response was to tilt his head to the side, and with that motion he easily stopped Kabaji's attack with the flat side of Wado Ikemonji. I told you to take this seriously, shouted Zoro before he struck with his swords in a downward diagonal slash, making twin deep cuts that went from Kabaji's right shoulder to his left hip, making the effeminate acrobat scream in pain as he began to bleed profusely. Zoro watched dispassionately as he sheathed the swords of his hands and then Wado Ikemonji. This was a disappointment, but I can't say I don't like the increase in strength after only 9 days training with my captain. Back with said straw hat wearing captain, he had a smirk on his face as Buggy glared at him while panting harshly. Buggy had tried his best to dodge Luffy's attacks and shots, but the teen was just too fast for Buggy to keep up for an extended period of time in his current situation. Using the powers of the Bara Bara no Mai normally didn't take a lot to maintain as long as he kept his body parts within the limit distance that allowed him to control them and he kept his feet on the ground. Luffy had managed to injure him many times, both with punches that hit hard enough to rattle his bones and damage his organs, and many shots from his flintlock and bullets were bullets. Where did you get that straw hat, you flashy bastard? Asked Buggy, his head swaying from side to side and almost dropping to the ground as he began to feel more and more fatigued with the second. Luffy chuckled as he pushed said straw hat with the muzzle of his flintlock. Shishishishi, your good friend Shanks entrusted it to me 10 years ago. You know, he told me about you and what happened when you were apprentices in the Roger Pirates. I doubt he remembers though, since he was drunk and laughing his ass off as he recalled your time together. Told me he was the reason you got your powers and couldn't swim anymore too. That flashy bastard. I'll kill him when I get my hands on him. Luffy shook his head. Yeah, I'm afraid that's not going to happen anytime soon. Night. The mental strain caused by trying to keep his body parts floating, attempting to dodge Luffy's attacks while also being in a world of pain turned out to be too much for Buggy as his eyes suddenly rolled to the back of his head and his floating body part, except for his feet, dropped to the ground, most of them with visible nasty bruises and bullet wounds that were bleeding in quite the worrying manner. Luffy sighed in disappointed as he pulled away his pistol. He passed out due to the blood loss and the pain. And it was such a fun target practice too, said Luffy with a pout as he began to gather Buggy's body parts except for his head, which was the only thing he needed to cash in his bounty. Besides, it wasn't like Buggy was going to die due to the bullet wounds, much less to the damage done to his body by his punches. Not like he cared, really. But it wasn't like he was about to give weak enemies he defeated a chance to come back and annoy him in the future. So, with that in mind, Luffy promptly dropped Buggy's body parts into the sea, where they sunk straight down like rocks due to the power of his devil fruit, if it was even possible. Buggy looked even more unconscious and more like a clown than before, with his skin pale white, his mouth and eyes open comically wide and his tongue hanging limply outside. "What's up with him?" questioned Zoro curiously after he approached him, not batting an eyelash at the sight of his captain holding Buggy's head like it was an everyday thing. What was truly disturbing was that Zoro could clearly see that Buggy was clearly still alive somehow. Devil Fruit's user's true weakness is oceanic water. I hurled the rest of his body into the ocean, so he is in kind of a coma right now. The only way he would ever wake up would be for someone to retrieve his body parts, which I very much doubt will ever happen, said Luffy. He knew he could have killed him, but he felt that since he used to be friends with Shanks in the past, an eternal dreamless sleep with the remote chance of ever waking up was better. So, if you ever encounter someone with a devil fruit power that you can't overcome using sword skills, just flick some ocean water at them. That should give you an opening you can take advantage of, said Luffy in amusement before laughing. Duly noted, replied Zoro with a sweat drop as he wondered, not for the first time, if his captain was right in the head. Still, his advice, even if it was intended as a joke, was something he was going to save for future reference. Luffy spoke of devil fruits as if they were pretty common in the Grand Line, and knowing the stories they told about those waters, he wouldn't be surprised if weirder and more powerful and more ridiculous devil fruit powers existed there. Yep, I'm so upping my training after today, no matter if it's already insane as it is right now. A few minutes later, Nami joined them, somehow carrying 5 bags full of riches. Luffy and Zoro turned towards the tent. They sweat dropped when they saw that there only remained empty barrels. Does she get a strength boost or something when it comes to money? Luffy wondered internally as he raised an eyebrow at her. How much did he have? Nami huffed in annoyance as she glared at Buggy's head after getting over her shock of seeing in its current state. She didn't wonder how he was still alive because she had already seen him detach part of his body like it was nothing. The rumors about the amount he had were exaggerated, surely by himself for some reason or another. I only gathered around 7 million, likely a bit less than that. She sulked as she looked at the 5 bags which she had left on the floor momentarily. Yeah, about that. Luffy trailed off and he smiled in nervousness as Nami turned sharply towards him. He gave Zoro a betrayed look when the man wisely got away from Nami's sight and left him to his own devices. Luffy sighed and turned towards Nami, who had her arms crossed. I don't think you should take all the money, Nami. What? She snapped, glaring at him. Why the hell not? Luffy raised his hands in a placating fashion, a motion that was even funnier since he was holding Buggy's head in his right hand. That tent likely held what Buggy and his pirates looted from this town. Not only that, but Buggy destroyed almost half of the town. Do you really want to leave the elderly, men, women and children without a manner in which they could rebuild and get themselves back up to where they were before Buggy got here? Nami lost her angry expression as Luffy explained, and she sighed in defeat when he finished. I guess you are right. I couldn't possibly do that. I'm not the type of scum to knowingly make others suffer, she said with a surprising amount of venom, something that Luffy saved away for later. I'll leave them the things Buggy took from them and 3 bags worth of money. That should give them enough to at least rebuild what was destroyed, and I am still left with around 2 million. That's better than nothing, I guess. She went back to sulking. Luffy laughed and patted her head tenderly, an action that for some reason made her happy and had her blushing like a ripe tomato. That's nice of you, Nami. Besides, it's not like you have to keep looking for money, since you are part of the crew. And the money that I collect is for the crew. You can take whatever you need. Nami paused and stared blankly at Luffy. What? Luffy returned the look with a tilt of his head and a clueless expression on his face. Hey, didn't I tell you that? I swore I did. But, yes, you can huff. He blinked and looked down to see Nami with her arms wrapped around his midsection and her face buried into his vest as her shoulders shook slightly. Nami, the orange-haired girl for her part, couldn't believe what she just heard. She knew that Luffy was being 100% honest with her at that moment. It only took her 9 days to figure a fundamental aspect of Luffy that should someone know about it, they would take advantage of it. Luffy didn't lie. Sure, he could withhold information and he could let you think whatever you wanted to think by not correcting you. But whenever he said something, it was because he at the very least believed that whatever he said was the truth. So, Nami knew that when Luffy was offering the money that was his, she knew that he meant it 100%. That meant that she had more than enough to finally buy her village back from Arlong. And that made her happy beyond belief. It was because of that reason that Nami allowed some tears to leak from the corner of her eyes as she looked up at Luffy with the warmest and truest smile she had given him yet. "Thank you, Luffy," she said simply before she buried her head back into his chest. Luffy blinked, smiled softly and hugged her back without saying a word. He didn't know what had prompted Nami's sudden emotional response, but he was glad that he had made her happy, as unintentional as it was. Still, he wondered why the knowledge of her finally realizing that she had reached her goal prompted such a response. No matter if it was her goal, it was only money after all. Unless, of course, there was something more to it. And Luffy was willing to bet his straw hat that it was. Perhaps he could gain more of Nami's trust so she would tell him and they could grow closer. Zoro stood to the side with his arms crossed and his eyes closed as he leaned against a wall, seemingly not paying attention. But if you looked closely, you could see a small smile on his face. After Nami finally got control of herself, the three of them made their way back to town square, in which they had left Chaochu looking after the unconscious forms of Boodle and Richie, with Nami refusing to look at Luffy in the eye while blushing, much to Zoro's amusement. They arrived only a few seconds before Boodle regained consciousness, and needless to say the man was overjoyed when he saw Luffy holding Buggy's head, not even asking how it was still obviously alive. Then when they told him that they recuperated what Buggy had stolen and that they were going to leave them with some of Buggy's treasure so they could rebuild what the clown pirate had destroyed, the man had begun to weep in happiness. So, it was not a surprise to anyone that the entire town had come to see them off during the later bits of the afternoon after Boodle had gone to tell them what had happened. Since Luffy and Co had arrived late in the morning and they had taken care of Buggy in less than an hour, the entire town had thrown a party in celebration, and Luffy, Nami and Zoro had joined earnestly. Zoro had somehow managed to get himself drunk in less than 30 minutes. Luffy had bested men taller and wider than him in eating contests. And Nami had danced happily with the townspeople, feeling the joy of having one of the many weights she had upon her shoulders lifting with Luffy's declaration. She was seriously considering now going in this voyage with him after she went back home and bought it from Arlong, so she could accomplish her true dream of mapping the entire world. But that was something that needed further thought than a spur-of-the-moment desire. The party ended relatively quickly since the townspeople wanted to go back to their homes and those that had theirs destroyed wanted to start rebuilding right away. Luffy and Zoro had no issues with that, and neither did Zoro, who was passed out drunk and had to be carried by Luffy. Thankfully, he had already taken Richie to their ship, otherwise it would have been tricky to figure out how to carry them both without Zoro ending with his head pressing against a part of Richie's body that he absolutely didn't want his head to be pressed against. After Luffy deposited Zoro in one of the crewmates' rooms, he went and pulled down the sails and raised their flag before he went and joined Nami in front of the helm as she held a compass and a map. "So, where to now, Captain?" Nami asked, using the word tentatively. It was surprising how right the word felt on her lips when she directed it at Luffy, and the wide grin he gave her made her respond with a similar one of her own. "We need to go to the nearest marine base, so I can turn Buggy's head in. After that, I'd like to see where we can find somewhere to make modifications to this ship, so she can tackle the Grand Line until we reach Water 7, where we should be able to get a proper ship built. But we must also find ourselves a cook, a doctor, surgeon, a carpenter, and a musician before we head to the Grand Line," mused Luffy thoughtfully as he rubbed his jaw. Nami raised an eyebrow at him. "I understand the first three, but why is a musician a must before heading to the Grand Line?" "No voyage is complete without good music," said Luffy sagely, almost looking as if he was quoting someone else. He actually was. "Want to guess who?" Nami shook her head before taking a look at her map. "I don't know where you would be getting more members for the crew, but there is a marine base in the Gecko Islands. It should only take us around 2 weeks to get there if the winds are kind and nothing unexpected happens," said Nami after a moment of observing her map, made by herself, of East Blue, and recalling the localizations of note that she had memorized in case she needed to usurp them of their money. "Then you know what to do. I'll go get Nina settled so we can be on our way," said Luffy before he walked away to do just that, leaving Nami shaking her head as she wondered when exactly had she gotten to the point that to her the thought of a Sea King towing their ship was normal. A few moments later the course was set and Nami went to the captain quarters so she would count the money she had gotten from the ordeal with Buggy in order to tell exactly how much Luffy needed to give her. Thinking of it made her feel all warm inside, and the smile on her face would only disappear when she found out the next day that since she was getting better, the intensity of the training needed to be increased. Luffy, meanwhile, was sitting on the deck looking up at Richie, who had finally woken up. He noticed the change right away. While before Richie looked like a savage animal that was only holding back due to the order of its master, the Menian lion now held itself with an obvious and natural regality to it that one could only be born with it. It was looking down at Luffy with eyes that were even more intelligent than before, and there was a deep sense of gratitude in them. Luffy inclined his head at the great beast that demanded respect with its mere presence. "I take it that you were obeying that Moji guy against your will, right?" He asked the unnecessary question for the sake of clarification. When Richie nodded at him, Luffy continued speaking. "Then I'm sorry for taking you with me on this ship without asking you if you wanted to. I'm afraid that the townspeople already saw you as a part of Buggy's crew and they wouldn't have been exactly overjoyed by your presence. If it is your desire, I'll leave you in the next island that has an ecosystem in which you can comfortably live in. Richie shook its head and it raised its left paw before he could put it on Luffy's right shoulder while bowing his great head to him after giving him an earnest expression. Luffy grinned as he got the message. You want to travel with us? The minion lion nodded its head. That's great. Welcome to the crew. I suppose Richie isn't your real name, is it? The minion lion shook its head rapidly with a disgusted look on its face before it stood up and walked towards the railing and raised its paw to point at the setting sun before he looked up and pointed at the sails that were being pushed by the wind. It took a moment, but Luffy got what he was trying to say. Sunset Wind, that's your name. The minion lion gave him a pleased nod and Luffy gave an impressed whistle and a grin as he regarded the magnificent beast. That's a pretty badass name. Though it's a bit of a mouthful if I have to say that every time I have to call you by your name. Said Luffy for a few moments before he perked up. Would you mind if I called you Sunny? That's close enough to your actual name and it isn't demeaning at all. His response was a nod and the equivalent of a shrug. Luffy grinned and extended his hand towards the newly dubbed Sunny. Then welcome to the crew, Sunny. It's an honor to have someone such as you as a member of our crew, declared Luffy with a delighted laugh. Sunny gave an approving and quite happy-sounding growl as he extended his right foreleg towards Luffy and exchanged a handshake. Identical grins on their faces. Zero. Boy, Luffy, started to say Zoro gruffly before pausing as a disturbed expression appeared on his face. Why is that beast of a lion doing what looks like leg-strengthening exercises with weights strapped to its back? It is actually a he and he's got a name, you know. It's Sunset Wind, but you can call him Sunny if you want. He's cool with it, replied Luffy right away as he continued to look at Sunny, who was doing precisely what Zoro said the great lion was doing, with a critical eye. And I'm obviously going to try to teach him the Rokushiki, of course. That's the reason why he is training just like you and Nami are. Don't ask silly questions, Zoro. I ain't asking no goddamn silly questions, you moron, shouted Zoro angrily with a comical angry face with narrowed white eyes and sharp like teeth. Why are you trying to teach Sunny the Rokushiki? And is it even possible for an animal to learn it? I'm going to answer your first question with one of my own. Can you imagine the faces the flunkies of the world government and the Marines are going to make when a lion of a species that can only be found in East Blue starts kicking their asses using their own techniques? Shishishishi. Luffy chuckled and nodded in approval after he saw what he was looking for, and he turned towards the now gaping Zoro with a grin. As for your second question, I thought I told you that anyone with the correct type of training, time and mindset can learn them. And Sunny definitely has all of that in spades, don't you, boy? Sunny roared in agreement as he continued to use his front and back legs to push his body up and down, a mildly strained expression on his face as he seemingly struggled against the weight that was strapped to his back using rope. Give it a rest, Zoro. Honestly, you should be used to things like that already, said Nami through pant as she did her own set of sit-ups while wearing the ways around her midsection, legs and arms that she had been using ever since Luffy started training her. She was still trying to wrap her head around the mechanism that allowed them to increase their weight after analyzing the current physical strength of the one that was wearing them. Won't Nina get jealous, though? Luffy frowned at her in confusion. Why would she get jealous? You got another pet, didn't you? Luffy raised his eyebrows alarmingly at her. Nina and Sunny ain't pets, Nami. They are members of the crew just like you, Zoro and I are. Just because they are of a different species altogether doesn't mean they are pets. Nina has an actual job to do, which is to make yours way easier, and Sunny is going to become a force to be reckoned with whom will fight at your side in the near future. I get it. Sorry, Sunny. I'll apologize to Nina after I'm done here, she said before she went back to focusing solely on what she was currently doing. Luffy, looking very pleased with himself after that, turned back towards Sunny in order to correct him on what he was doing wrong and walk him through the training routine Luffy wanted him to develop so he could learn the Rokushiki as fast as he was able. Zoro could only shake his head in disbelief. Am I the only sane person on this ship? He muttered. For some reason, that's fucking depressing. 0. A few days after Luffy and his crew left Orangetown, Adoni approached the town from the direction of the docks that Buggy had used to set his base. The only occupant of the small sailboat was an extremely beautiful woman that was grasping the tiller as she smiled serenely at the upcoming island with hopeful dark green eyes. She was wearing a white cowboy hat, a bikini top that strained against her big, perky breasts, and pink capri pants that showed off her slim, toned and well-endowed figure. Over all of that she wearing a pink cloak-like cape with pink hearts. I hope my dear Luffy-sama came through here after he left me on Shell's Town as a test to see if I could be competent enough to free myself and find him to show that I am worthy of him," said the quite changed Alvida lovingly as she caressed her new spiked iron mace that rested at her side on the boat. She had acquired it at Shell's Town before she escaped using a doni that was idly resting at the docks that for some reason had been stockpiled with enough food to last for a few days. Seeing such a thing had led her to convince herself even more of her own delusions about the reason behind Luffy leaving her within a cell in Shell's Town Marine Base. She thought that the boat had been Luffy's reward for successfully escaping and his encouragement for her to find him. If she knew the whole story on how the doni was there, if you squinted until your eyes were slits, you could say that Luffy was kind of indirectly responsible for Alvida acquiring the boat. After she left Shell's Town, she had found herself on a medium-sized island that wasn't recorded in the official maps of East Blue. There she found and ate a devil fruit that made her immune to physical attacks by making them slip off her body. Not only that, but eating the fruit had made her even more beautiful by making the freckles that were in her face disappear and enhancing her previous looks to levels she could only had dreamt of before. "I have been learning how to use my new powers and increasing my abilities just for you, Luffy-sama. I'll show you that I am worthy of you when the time comes for us to meet again," she declared with a happy and beautiful grin as she suddenly stood up as she reached the docks. Her breasts bouncing with the motion, making the workers that were repairing the damages from Buggy's stay stop and stare with heart in their eyes, blushing faces and drool leaking from the corners of their mouths. Alvida's smile widened as she saw this. With her newfound enhanced beauty, it had gotten easier to get men, and some women, to tell her what she wanted to know. She was sure that getting information on Luffy would be easy enough, and in no time at all she would be on his trail. After all, it was now obvious that her dear Luffy-sama had come through here. She had heard about Buggy the Clown setting shop here in Orangetown, and a distinct lack of pirate presence here meant that he had been defeated and driven off at the very least, or captured, killed for his bounty, which was the more likely. And Alvida knew that there were only two men within East Blue strong enough to defeat Buggy. One of them was that awful fishman Arlong that has been ruling the Konomi Islands, who she knew would never leave the comfort and security of his throne in order to fight someone like Buggy, which discarded the possibility of it being him. The second one was, of course, her dear Luffy-sama, whom she knew to be heading on this direction, and from her previous encounter with him and getting a read on him she knew that he had more than enough reasons to take on Buggy. Getting off the boat, Alvida's happy and friendly smile widened as the workers approached her almost as if they were puppies looking up at their human owner. She was sure she was on the right path, and it was only a matter of time before she was reunited with her dear Luffy-sama. Zero, it's such a beautiful day, muttered a young man with a slim physique, tan skin, with medium-length black woolly hair, prominent lips, and a long nose. He was wearing an olive-green plaid bandana, a blue and white striped armband on his left arm, brown overalls with a white sash and no shirt underneath. He was also carrying with him a yellow satchel. He had his arms crossed and was looking at the ocean from a cliff with a content expression on his face. There's nothing like starting such a happy day by looking at the sea. The young man was about to begin his daily routine of falsely alerting the town of there being a pirate attack, so they knew that it was time for them to get on with their days when his sharp eyesight caught something appearing over the horizon. His eyes widened when he saw that it was a ship and it was coming straight towards them. The reason of his surprise was because it was rare when a ship arrived at their island through this side. The last time he saw a ship that big was when his father sailed away actually. Frowning a bit at the painful memories, the young man focused a bit more on the ship to see what details of it he could make out from here, which were way more than what the regular person could thanks to his well-developed eyesight. He gave a sigh of relief when he saw the blank sails and flag of the ship. That meant that they weren't pirates. After narrowing his eyes and focusing when the ship was about 2 miles away, he managed to make out 4 figures standing against the railing of the forecastle deck, one of them significantly taller and furrier than the other. "What in the hell?" he muttered as he continued on watching, only to gape in shock when all of a sudden a brown, gigantic sea king rose from the water right to next ship until its head was half the height of the main mast. Then it ducked its head towards the figures only for him to fall on his ass in shock when he managed to make out one of the figures actually rubbing its head before it jumped towards the sea king and untied the ropes that it had wrapped around it, body close to where the head started. Then they anchored the ship after they got a mile closer to the coast, and the 4 figures, now distinct enough to realize that one of them was an orange-haired woman, another one was a man wearing a straw hat, another was a man with green hair and 3 swords strapped to the haramaki on his waist, and the furrier, bigger one was a freaking minion lion, got into the boat that was attached to the ship's side and lowered it so they could approach the beach. Usopp could only gape in shock for a few moments before he recovered, and he began to make his way towards the town so he could take the path down towards the beach. So excited he was to get a closer look at this group of people that he completely forgot to yell about pirates coming. This would result in many people being late to their work. 000. The previous 14 days for Luffy and Co had been pretty much a repeat of the 9 days they spent on the sea when they went from Shell's Town to Orangetown, with the only true major difference being Sunny's presence. The Minion Lion quickly became friends with everyone, even Nina, proving Luffy's words about them not being pets but rather crew members, and he showed aspects of his personality freely. He was regal when serious and diligent when he had something to accomplish, like training for example, but when he was relaxing, he acted like a house cat, falling asleep in the most random places and purring whenever some scratched him on the spots which were behind his ears, underneath his chin and anywhere on his belly, surprising Zoro. Not facing Nami and pleasing Luffy, Sunny had taken to the training extremely well and his strength had increased noticeably even if he was still weeks away from being able to start learning the Rokushiki. But Luffy had no doubts that he would be able to use them with a few quick exceptions, Kami-e and Shigen, the former more so than the latter. Kami-e had been developed with the potential the human body had to be flexible and bend in manners that didn't look possible. As intelligent as he was, Sunny wasn't a human, so there was not learning that for him. And the matter with Shigen was that Sunny lacked the ability to make his claw point straight frontwards, so he was going to have to develop a manner in which he could use the technique, or somehow adapt it to what he could do. He was not going to have issues learning Soru, Jeppo, Tekai, and Rankyaku eventually. Nami's overall physical abilities had increased noticeably once again from where she was at 14 days ago, even putting to shame her growth in comparison after the first 11 days of training. This was because Nami had gotten used somewhat to the intensity of the exercises, and without knowing she was able to push herself even further, which resulted in better results. Like Sunny, however, she was still weeks away from being able to use the Rokushiki, but that didn't mean that she wasn't pleased with where she was at the moment. According to Luffy, with whom she was lightly sparring every day as well as she was now, she would have been able to deal with Kabachi with not too much difficulty. Not only that, but Nami had also started to notice the changes in her body. She was thankfully not bulking up, but she was definitely getting more defined and perky, and that pleased her even more than her current fighting ability. The one that took the cake, however, was Zoro. The green-haired swordsman was an absolute monster and his growth rate was ridiculous. He had been already really near to being on the level needed to start learning the easiest techniques of the Rokushiki when Luffy met him. But the fact that after only 23 days of training he was already showing the signs of being able to use Soru astounded even Luffy. He estimated that in about 2 months' time Zoro would have at least a rudimentary grasp of all Rokushiki techniques, and even then Luffy felt that he wasn't giving his first mate enough credit. Luffy also noticed that every 2 days he had to up the rhythm of their spars. It astounded him when he realized that Zoro would soon enough be able to keep up with him going all out using the Rokushiki, and if he could learn it eventually, and Luffy was inclined to say that Zoro could, haki. The only advantage Luffy would ever have over Zoro would be his devil fruit powers, and that was only because of their nature, and it wasn't even going to be by that much if Zoro learned Busashoku haki. That was many months into the future, however, and Luffy and Co had to first get themselves prepared to enter the Grand Line. They needed to acquire more money, expand their crew, and modify their ship. Luffy didn't know where they were going to achieve the last two, but at least he was going to cash in Buggy's bounty and get 15 million more berries for the crew here in the marine base that was located in the Gecko Islands. Luffy patted the bag tied to his sash, inside of which was Buggy's comatose head. The marine base is in Pancake Town. This beach is part of Syrup Village, which is located only a few hours away on foot south of Pancake Town. So, you should be able to get your business there done by afternoon, which would mean that we could leave today. That's starting to become a trend. Spend less than a day in every island we visit, commented Nami as she watched Luffy, Zoro, and Sunny drag the boat towards the sand. After that was done, Zoro turned towards her and shrugged. Hey, I don't really care one way or another about that. As long as I get to get drunk every day and a good fight every now and then, I'm alright with following you two around, said Zoro uncaringly before he pointed towards a log that wasn't too far away of them and clearly had someone poorly hiding behind it. What the hell is up with that guy over there though? Luffy, Nami, and Sunny turned to where Zoro was pointing with curious eyes, and they indeed saw someone looking at them with wide eyes before he surprised them when he jumped out of his hidden spot and stood with his arms crossed over his chest and an intense look on his eyes. His legs were shaking though. I am the great pirate fleet leader Usopp. I am in charge of the security of this village. You may call me Captain Usopp. My 80 million men, and I will show no mercy if you prove to be a threat to this village, he declared. Nami looked at him flatly. Can't you tell a more convincing lie? She deadpanned at him. Usopp grabbed his head and a comically shocked expression appeared on his face. Gah, I've been found out. He doesn't even deny it, muttered Zoro with an amused chuckle. Gah, did I just say that? Bad planning indeed, he shouted again, this time even more dramatically. Luffy laughed at him while Sunny seemingly could only sweat drop. You are funny, said Luffy before he looked at Usopp closely. "You know, I know this is the first time I've seen you in my life, but I can't help but think you look familiar," muttered Luffy, racking his brain thinking about it only to perk up after a moment when realized how similar was Usopp's name to a man that belonged to Shanks' crew. "You're Usopp's son, aren't you?" Usopp, who had been staring at awe at Sunny after he got over them discovering his lie so easily and him unintentionally confirming to them that he was lying, turned towards him so fast that it almost looked like he broke his neck. "You know my dad. Ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. You could say that. He was part of the crew of the man that inspired me to become a pirate myself. I remember that when he was drunk, he couldn't stop blabbering about how proud he was of his son and how much he loved his wife. He also taught me how to properly use a flintlock, but I'm afraid I'll never be as good as him. That man could hit a bullseye while drunk, eyes closed, hundreds of meters away, turned away from the target and holding the gun over his shoulder." Zoro and Nami gave him wide-eyed looks after he revealed that. Sunny only looked on board, likely because since he was a lion, he didn't grasp the ridiculousness of the feat Luffy described. Usopp too was looking at him wide eyes, so surprised that he even ignored the fact that Luffy just told him that he was a pirate, which more than likely meant that his two companions were also pirates. Instead, he focused on a more pressing manner to him. "You met my father. When did you meet him?" Luffy shrugged his shoulders. "About 10 years ago. Give it or take it a few months. That means that it happened around the time he left Mom and me. At least now I know that he had not been in East Blue since then," thought Usopp with some relief as he didn't know how he would have reacted if his father had been in East Blue all this time and had not come to visit him. Though Usopp didn't know how he would have taken the news of his mother's death, he was sure that having his father there with him through those tough times would have made things more bearable for him. Usopp shook his head and gave Luffy a small smile. "I see. Thanks for telling me." Luffy grinned and waved high apologies off uncaringly. "No problem." It was then when Usopp remembered the other important thing Luffy said and he pointed at them while backing away a few steps in shock. "You are pirates, and is it now when he reacts to that?" muttered Zoro with some amused disbelief. "These three are pirates. I'm just their navigator," denied Nami with a shake of her head. She might like Luffy, having realized that he was a good person despite claiming that his desire was to become the king of all pirates. And Zoro too to some extent, and she had fully wrapped her head around the fact that Sunny was also a crew member, but that she was still far ways from wanting to be catalogued with that title. She couldn't help the happy flutter in her stomach and the pink that colored her cheeks when Luffy beamed at her so earnestly after admitting that she was their navigator, though. Seeing how nervous Usopp was, Luffy was quick to reassure him. "Don't worry, Usopp. You have my word that we are not here to cause trouble. Our purpose in coming here is to cash in a bounty in the marine base in Pancake Town and maybe get someone to modify our ship so it can take on difficult waters of the Grand Line. We are also looking for new people to join our crew before we go there." "The Grand Line?" Usopp asked, sounding impressed after he calmed down when he saw the sincerity in Luffy's eyes. He grinned. "That sounds like an adventure. You say you are looking for members. Well, I'll be willing to join if you make me the captain." Luffy blinked. "Not gonna happen," was Zoro's immediate response. "Impossible," said Nami. Luffy laughed. "You are funny. I like you already." Usopp had a depressed air around him as he saw these reactions. "Can you guys at least do as if you were considering the offer? My high self-esteem can only take so many blows," he muttered before seemingly perking up as if nothing happened. "Anyways, you guys said you were also looking to make modifications to your ship, right? I know a guy that makes designs for luxury ships and oversees their construction, so he might be able to help you." Luffy beamed at him. "Really? Thanks a lot, Usopp." Nami frowned and peered at Usopp intently. "Can you give us an estimate on how much it's gonna cost?" Usopp shrugged his shoulders. "I can't be sure. You'll have to talk with him. Come on, follow me. I'll take you there. After that you might thank me by allowing me to be the captain of the crew if I decide to accept your offer to join, of course." Zoro deadpanned at him. "You were not invited." Usopp grasped at his heart as if he had been struck in the heart by a poisoned arrow. "Gah, so cold and direct. Be more tactful." Nami groaned. Zoro snorted and Luffy laughed as Usopp began to lead them toward the town. Sunny followed them with a regal air about him as he peered curiously at his surroundings. "So," Usopp began to say after a few moments, a bit hesitant, "I can see you have a Menian lion with you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was that a sea king that you petted and sent away after you anchored your ship?" Luffy grinned. So, this guy's eyesight was good enough to make out that many details from what had to be at least a distance of 2 miles. Interesting. Usopp led Luffy, Nami, Zoro and Sunny through the village, the group easily gathering the attention of the villagers what with an excited Usopp intently listening to Luffy as he regaled him with the stories of how Nina and had Usopp reacted ridiculously when he found out that the Sea King was a female and named as such. And Sunny joined the crew, someone that could only be pirate hunter Roronoa, Zoro following behind with a bored look on his face and an orange-haired girl trying and failing to get a freaking Menian lion to let her ride on his back. Even though the scene freaked everyone out, No one moved to do anything as it was obvious that they weren't causing trouble, and the Minion Lion was obviously trained and well-behaved despite its constant refusals to the girl. There was also the fact that Roronoa Zoro's presence, a notorious bounty hunter whose targets were normally pirates, hence his moniker, assured them that this group was not made of pirates. And finally, despite his lying and desire to be a pirate like his father, everyone in Syrup Village knew that Usopp was harmless and a coward. So if he was willing to directly interact with this group meant that despite them looking intimidating and tough, they were harmless. Oh, if they only knew. It took no time for the village to start ignoring them, so they could get back to their work. As a wise man someone said, "Ignorance is bliss." Luffy and the crew followed Usopp towards the outskirts of the village, following a path that led them to a small hill that overlooked the entire Syrup Village, the forest, and the ocean because of its height. The most glaring aspect of the hill, however, was the enormous, walled mansion that rested on top of it. It looked out of place for many reasons, mainly its size and design in comparison with other buildings within the village, and that wasn't even counting the fact that it was located atop the small hill. Luffy gave it an appreciative look as he whistled. "That's a very nice house. Is the guy that's going to modify our ship the owner?" If that was the case, then it could only mean that the guy was the real deal, as he was successful enough to get himself such a big house in a place like Syrup Village, where everyone else was more of the humble sort. Usopp shook his head in the negative. "No, the guy that might be able to help you works for the actual owner as her butler. He does ship designs on the side as a hobby, but I promise he is the real deal," he assured them before he smiled softly as he looked towards the mansion. "The owner is a sickly but sweet girl named Kaya. Her parents died about 3 years ago of natural causes, leaving her with everything he had, which includes the mansion, the land in which Syrup Village is built, and a few businesses over in Pancake Town. Because of her sickness and status, she's been very lonely. But I managed to become her friend, and I occasionally sneak in to make her company." Nami, who had given up on trying to convince Sunny to give her a ride, grinned as she heard this, and she fell into step next to Usopp as she nudged him teasingly. "Huh, who would have thought? The good-for-nothing liar turned out to be a decent guy with a crush on the princess of the island," she said, easily being able to tell that Usopp was telling the truth in that moment. Usopp blushed and stammered for a few moments before he shook his head, missing Nami's giggling and Zoro's and Luffy's snickering, as he managed to get his wits back about him. His face was still somewhat red though. I would appreciate if next time you complimented me. There wasn't a bigger insult in your words," he told her, and she waved him off uncaringly. He sighed. "I get no respect here. Anyways, I think if I vouch for you guys, maybe I can get Kaya to get married to work on your ship at a reasonable price." Nami frowned a bit. "And how much would you consider to be a reasonable price?" she asked, settling into her still unofficial role as the crew's treasurer. She had finally got around counting the amount they had on board, and it amounted to about 45 million berries. The 10 million Luffy already possessed when he began sailing. The 5 million she got from Alvida's treasure, plus Alvida's own bounty of 5 million. The 6 million she got from the marine base at Shell's Town. The 2 million she acquired from the fiasco with Buggy, and finally the 15 million bounty that was on said clown's head that Luffy would be cashing up later, plus the 2 million she had managed to scrap up on her own before meeting Luffy. It had floored her completely that in less than a month ever since meeting and traveling with Luffy, she had managed to acquire almost half of what she needed in order to save her village, even when she had only needed about 20 million when she last set out. If that wasn't the world itself telling her that going with Luffy was the best thing she could do, she didn't know what all of it meant. And an even bigger surprise to her was that she hadn't felt the temptation of stealing the money and the ship and sail back towards the Konomi Islands on her own. She knew deep down that it wasn't because she wouldn't be able to do so, what with Luffy, Nina, Zoro, and Sunny being able to easily stop her. She knew that there was no need for her to do such things since Luffy had already promised her the money she needed to purchase Kakuyashi Village from Arlong so she could save them. She knew that as his navigator, she belonged to Luffy's crews, that she was one of his. She had seen enough of Luffy's character to know that his word was his bond when it came to those he considered friends. She liked to think that it was the case between them, that they were at least friends. Oh, and there's also the fact that I am impossibly attracted to him, and I can tell that he is as attracted to me as I am to him. I hope for more than friendship in the future. His glances are not that discreet, which isn't a surprise. That can wait a bit though, she thought with a furious blush as her eyes trailed a few times in his direction, her stomach fluttering a bit as she saw him and Zoro snickering while pointing at a for some reason annoyed Sunny. She got her head back in the game. She had to make sure they didn't get scammed and that there was enough money for her to buy her village back. Usopp didn't notice this as he shrugged his shoulders uncaringly. I wouldn't really know, since shipbuilding and design isn't my thing. What I do know is that it's sure to cost a significant amount, since you have to take into account materials and workforce, you know. Nami clicked her tongue in annoyance but nodded in understanding. She would have to wait to talk to Kaya's butler and haggle for prizes if that turned out to be the case. "Oi," called out Zoro after the amusement at seeing Sunny being annoyed by a few bugs he couldn't drive away by snapping at them with his jaws died down. "I want to get back to training and drinking myself to a coma, so let's get this over with," he shouted with some annoyance as he rested his arm on top of his swords. Ever since he joined the crew and got introduced to Luffy's training methods, he had become an even bigger training freak. Not only that, but the seemingly endless alcohol supply tended to his secondary addiction. Being away from them for a few hours resulted in Zoro feeling a bit antsy after more than 20 days of non-stop indulging. Gulping a bit at Zoro's annoyed glare, Usopp ignored Luffy's uncaring grin and Nami's eye roll as he hastened his pace and covered the last few years of the trip and stopped in front of the gate and the men guarding it. After being at the end of Roronoa, Zoro's annoyance, ignoring the glares from the two guardsmen was easy. "Good morning, fine gentlemen. This is Captain Usopp speaking." With a rather out-of-character act, "I am here to cause no mischief but rather guiding these people who have business with Kaya-sama," he declared in an over-the-top fashion after motioning towards Luffy and Co. with a ridiculous flourish. The two guardsmen exchanged unsure glances as they gave Zoro, whom they recognized as a bloodthirsty and ruthless bounty hunter, and Sunny, whom looked to be the most dangerous of the four of them, wary looks. Nami stepped forward and smiled at the men, smirking as her sensual appearance and beauty did its job in gathering the attention of the two men and distracting them. What Usopp-kun meant to say is that we would like to see if Kaya-san's butler would be able to design and oversee a few modifications we would like to get for our ship. "I promise we are not here to cause trouble," she said, smiling sweetly. The guards exchanged another glance before the one of the left nodded slowly. "If that's the case, I don't think there would be an issue on letting them go inside, right?" he asked his counterpart that stood at the right, his eyes trailing back to Nami as he blushed and grinned like a loon. "I suppose you are right," said the one of the right, also distracted by Nami's figure and sweetness. He still had more sense than his partner, so he was thinking about possible repercussions, like getting fired or being forbidden from going on that vacation that Klahadore had so kindly arranged for them and most of the mansion's staff. He still concluded that letting this group go in and establish business with Kaya-sama wouldn't result in that. There had to be a compromise though. "I'm afraid that your pet minion lion is going to have to wait outside though." "Oi," Luffy shouted as he wrapped an arm around an annoyed Sunny's neck as the two of them glared at the suddenly nervous guards. "Sunny ain't no pet. He is a full-fledged member of Ouch. Nami, what gives?" whined Luffy with a pout as he cradled his right foot which Nami had promptly stepped on. Even though he had felt the stomp, it hadn't really hurt but it had still surprised him. With her sweet smile having gone strained at Luffy almost revealing that he was a pirate, which wouldn't have gone well for anyone involved, Nami ignored him and addressed the guards. "That won't be a problem, good sirs. Sunny is very well behaved so he shouldn't have any issues with waiting for us here, right?" The last part of her speech was directed towards Sunny, who still looked annoyed. The minion lion glanced at Nami, huffed and then snorted before he went to lay down next to a tree that was giving quite the nice shade. Luffy pouted even harder. Nami turned back towards the guards and cocked her head cutely. "See, no problem at all." The guards could only look at the group strangely before shaking their heads and silently opening the doors for them. With a happy expression of gratitude, Nami almost skipped in and she was followed by a pouting Luffy who began to complain about her treating Sunny like a pet and making him stay behind, with Nami ignoring him completely, which only resulted in Luffy pouting even harder. Usopp gaped in disbelief as he turned towards Zoro. "Is this the norm with you guys?" Zoro nodded almost solemnly. "Depressingly enough, you have seen nothing yet," he said with a shake of his head before he clicked his tongue and turned away from the mansion and back towards the village. "Anyways, it's not like I am actually needed here. I'm sure Nami and Luffy can take care of business here. If they, for some asinine reason, need me, tell them that I am getting wasted on the local bar and that I will likely be passed out inside a dirty alley," said Zoro as he threw an uncaring wave as he walked away. Usopp looked at him walking away with wide eyes and a gaping mouth before he shook his head in disbelief. "These guys are crazy," he said to himself before he ran towards Luffy and Nami who had been waiting for him. He looked at them with an unsure smile. He told them what Zoro said and their only reaction was Luffy chuckling and uncaringly waving it off as a non-issue while Nami clicked her tongue and rolled her eyes in annoyance. Neither of them acted like it was unexpected though. The three of them began to walk towards the doors of the mansion only for one of the windows of the first floor to open almost abruptly as a pale-skinned and blonde-haired girl with light brown eyes peeked the top half of her body out. She had a smile on her face as she waved at them. "Usopp-kun." Usopp grinned when he saw her. "Kaya." He waved back at her for a moment before he turned towards Luffy and Nami. "Come on, let me introduce you to her," he said before he began to make his way towards the still smiling girl. Luffy shrugged and followed while Nami pouted a bit at Usopp not allowing her to tease him about Kaya being really pretty. Oh well, she was sure there was going to be time for that later. When Usopp reached Kaya, she looked down at him as she rested her forearms on the lower frames of her window as she gave him a fond smile. You were here earlier today, and you didn't sneak around to get here for a chance. Is Captain Usopp, the brave warrior of the sea, changing his vile ways? She teased him a bit with her words. She knew that the stories he told her were lies, but she also knew why he did it, and he didn't have the slightest clue how much it meant to her. When her only other options for company were her two senior butlers, Clahador and Mary, both of whom she loved very much but could be too much in their worrying, taking care of and tending to their duties regarding her, it was no wonder she appreciated Usopp so much. Usopp blushed red at her teasing words and the look on her face. He began to stammer and make denying motions with his arms. No, of course not. I shall never change my ways. Mwahaha. He laughed, somewhat nervously, at the end before pointing at Luffy and Nami, who had amused expressions on their faces as they stood to the side and watched the interaction. I am not here to regale you with my adventures. These fine people have official business with you, and I took it upon myself to take them here, he declared proudly as he crossed his arms and adopted a satisfied expression. Kaya giggled before shaking her head fondly at him. Never change, Usopp-kun. Never change, she said, giggling again when he looked away bashfully as he rubbed the back of his head, before turning towards the black-haired teen wearing a straw hat and the orange-haired girl with brown eyes darker than her own. She looked at them with curious eyes and a smile. Hello, my name is Kaya. What kind of official business these would be? So polite, complimented Nami, both because she wanted to make a good impression and because it was a nice breath of fresh air after dealing with the likes of Zoro and, to a somewhat lesser extent, Luffy for so long. She stepped forward with a smile and motioned towards herself. My name is Nami. Pleasure to meet you. I am Monkey D. Luffy, the man that will become. Luffy began to say as he also approached, but he was abruptly stopped when Nami stomped on his foot. Again, why? He whined. Nami ignored Luffy's childish pout and her smile was strained and nervous as she looked at the curious look Kaya sent towards Luffy. Ignore him. He gets excited easily, she said uncaringly and getting the blonde girl's attention. Usopp here told us that a member of your staff, Mary I think he said his name was, is well versed in ship design and modification. We would like to talk to him about upgrading our ship and how much it would cost. Kaya's eyes gleamed in realization and her smile widened a bit. Oh, if that's the case then you may come inside so you can speak with Mary. He manages his business on his own after all, she said, not having a problem with inviting them into her house. Usopp vouched for their character and despite knowing he was a liar, she knew for a fact that he was a good person and a good judge of character. What are you doing here? A sudden voice declared and they turned to see a well-dressed person walking towards them at a fast pace. He was a tall and slim man with glasses and slicked black hair. He wore a black suit with two golden markings on it that resembled piled excrement over a white shirt with a curious collar, with spiral-like protrusions on the edges, and a black tie. He also sported striped shoes. He was glaring at all of them, except for Kaya, with an annoyed expression on his face. You can't just come into the mansion uninvited like this. Kaya gave him a surprised look. Clahador. Luffy just looked at him with curiosity. Who's he? Usopp clicked his tongue in annoyance and looked away. Ugh, the butler, Kaya began to explain with a worried expression on her face. Listen, Clahador, these people didn't come uninvited. They actually. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.